I'm your bedtime historian, and tonight we slip past gilded doors, where the sweetest wine once carried the quietest deaths. Irony drips like spilled mead when poison whispers louder than a king's decree. A candle flickers behind heavy curtains. A goblet glimmers in a trembling hand. A single sip, a silent nod, and the world tilts on its axis unnoticed by the roaring hall. Why risk open swords when crushed herbs in the stew do the job just fine? What secrets did nobles slip into silver cups, while jesters danced and minstrels sang of loyalty? Taste was power, and sometimes tasting was fatal. If you find yourself lingering here, eavesdropping on deadly toasts, maybe stay a while longer. Hit like and subscribe so this hidden corner of history stays warm and lit. If you're sipping tea or cocoa while nobles sip their doom share where you're listening from, I like to imagine secret conspiracies brewing in distant kitchens. Now dim, the lights let the fire crackle softer and lean closer to the long table where betrayal tastes of honeyed wine and a bruised plum. You wander through a great hall lit by candle chandeliers, each flame flickering above silver platters and golden goblets. The air hums with the clink of knives, the rustle of silks, and the hush of conversations that never say quite what they mean. Among the nobles seated here, a select few learned it early that it was wiser to season a meal than to swing a sword. Poison, subtle and silent, became the courtier's blade sharp enough to sever dynasties. Take Eleanor of Aquitaine's court. Rumors swirl that more than one goblet carried secrets heavier than wine. Some historians argue she merely maneuvered with wit and alliance, yet scribbled notes suggest more than diplomacy might have kept rivals quiet. Scholars still bicker over who first perfected the art of the friendly taste tester loyal servants who'd risk a sip before the Lord did. Some did it willingly, others not so much. A curious fact, medieval kitchens often locked away their herbs like crown jewels. Mandrake root hemlock, even foxglove kitchen boys learned early that a misplaced pinch could mean a wedding night turned funeral procession. One peculiar record tells of a cook who wore iron gloves while preparing fish for a viscount, claiming it kept his conscience clear if the poison was hidden in the sauce, not his fingers. Imagine leaning over your trenchers, your heart pounding as you watch your neighbor's cup. Would they taste first? Would they notice the bitterness? Poison didn't always kill. Outright, it weakened, made a man forget his lines at court, made a lady falter when signing away lands. Death came second. Ruin came first. Some recipes for these sly assassinations survive in coded notes, ink faded by centuries' margins, scribbled with harmless herbal remedies. Modern historians wonder, were these real instructions or just superstition scrawled by paranoid scribes? The debate lingers like stale wine at the bottom of an abandoned chalice. Picture a feast where every bite is a gamble. The roasted swan glistens with honey. The stewed pears shine like jewels. A flute player drifts through a tune, masking the quiet slip of a ring into a goblet, a flick of the wrist, a sudden cough muffled by laughter. You watch servants hover, taste nod, step back. You wonder who they serve more loyally, their master, or the one who paid them extra in a shadowed corridor. Sometimes the poisoner was the Lord himself, tucked away behind a smiling face, sleeves dusted with crushed powder, the taste masked by rare spices from the east. Cloves, nutmeg, saffron, the treasures of trade routes turned into elegant murder weapons. A dish too exotic to suspect a spice so strong it drowned the bitter bite of betrayal. One odd tale whispers of a baron who hid vials inside hollowed-out candlesticks. When the moment came, He'd dip his signet ring, swirl his wine, and pass the cup with a grin. Some call it legend. Some claim a stained parchment found in a crumbling manor's wall proves otherwise. Servants spoke in hushed tones, telling each other which master's table to avoid. Some carried antidotes sewn into their belts, simple vials of vinegar, or crushed charcoal to swallow in secret if a taste turned wrong. Not all survived to tell the tale. The lucky ones simply vanished, taking their knowledge to unmarked graves behind the orchard walls. Yet poison wasn't always death. It was leverage. A well-timed illness could soften a stubborn heir or delay an unwelcome wedding. Some families became infamous for their discreet remedies, enough that neighbors thought twice before accepting an invitation to supper. Historians still puzzle over how many royal lines shifted because a cup was left unattended or a trusted steward turned his head just long enough. Was it greed revenge or the thrill of power that spiced these banquets? No scroll answers that fully, though the rumor mills of Europe never slept. You watch the hall now, your footsteps silent on rushes strewn with herbs to mask the stench. Somewhere a goblet trembles in a shaky hand. A toast echoes. Laughter blooms, yet in the hush between harp notes, betrayal breathes. A faint draft curls through a shadowed hallway, brushing past tapestries that do more than decorate. Behind their woven hunts and saints' faces, secrets breathe and linger, thin tunnels carved by men who trusted whispers more than walls. Tonight, your steps press softly over cold stone floors. You pause, ear near an embroidered stag, leaping over stitched brambles. Beyond the threads, voices. A lady's hush, a lord's low vow, a promise not meant for ears like yours. Yet here you are listening, like the walls once did. Picture a grand castle spiraling towers above, but below a warren of secret passages snaking through walls 2 men wide. Some were built by design, part of the architecture since the first stone was laid. Others were dug, later chipped away, by masons paid to keep their mouths shut. Rumor claims the Medici villas were riddled with such hidden veins, narrow gaps, where a servant could stand for hours, hearing who planned what betrayal next. There's a well-known fact among castle scholars: the thicker the walls, the more likely they hid a second life. Within these stone bellies, voices carried like water through pipes. One footstep, misplaced, could send echoes to a corridor half a wing away. So the clever nobles learned: speak softly, walk softer, and never trust the empty room next door. Some of these hidden tunnels doubled as bolt holes if whispers turned sour and poison failed. A quick dash through a concealed door might save a throat from a dagger. But more often, they served as the ears of the Lord. Behind that solemn tapestry of saints or hunting stags, a spy crouched on a wooden plank in stale air, a candle stub for company scribbling on parchment scraps. Who dallied with whose wife, who owed which debt, these scraps fed power. A quirky twist in some castles, the listening holes were built inside chimneys. The warmth of the kitchen fires masked the presence of the spy above. Imagine a trusted steward perched above the hearth, soot on his sleeves, scribbling, while gossip floated with the smoke. Some scholars remain puzzled whether these chimney spies really existed or were just tales invented to chill unruly courtiers into silence. If you were to lean close enough, now you'd smell the damp wool of the tapestry. Feel the draft that hints at a hollow behind the stone. Maybe you'd even catch the scratch of quill on parchment, an invisible record keeper whose notes decide who sleeps safely tonight and who never wakes. One curious record tells of an English countess who designed an entire whisper gallery above her ballroom, a domed ceiling that bounced murmurs from one corner to another. A single word spoken near the orchestra drifted down to the ladies' chamber. Was it an accident of architecture, or did she demand it so she could sip her wine while listening to nobles pledge secrets they'd soon regret? Surviving plans of that manor show suspicious curves and passages, but historians still argue over whether it was clever acoustics or scandalous design. You drift further down this imagined hallway. Picture a servant bare feet, silent on cold flagstones, slipping behind a tapestry so faded its hunting dogs look like ghosts. He cups his ear to a small hole drilled through the stone. Beyond it, two lords bicker over debts unpaid. A name drops, a plan stirs, and tomorrow that servant's master gains a new ally or a new blackmail note hidden under a pillow. It wasn't all sinister. Sometimes these tunnels saved lives. A whispered warning caught behind velvet drapery could mean a swift escape before the poison was poured. A rumor overheard in the dark might stop a dagger at dawn. And sometimes the spies themselves turned traitors, selling secrets twice over. No one trusted a hidden ear for long. There is no scholarly consensus on how widespread these eavesdropping tunnels truly were. Some castles reveal bricked-up passages and curious vents that hint at a hidden listener's perch. Others show nothing at all, and we wonder if stories of listening behind tapestries are just the fever dreams of writers longing for a more dramatic past. Yet tonight, here you stand, nose an inch from a dusty woven stag ears pricked for secrets that never sleep. Somewhere behind that wall, betrayal breathes warm and shallow. Footsteps retreat. The whisper fades, and you, invisible ghost among stone and thread, hold the secret tight as you slip back into the corridor's hush. A horn's distant echo breaks the hush somewhere beyond the castle walls. The forest stirs with the restless beat of hooves. Hunting horns in the night mean more than sport when nobles ride armed to the teeth. You stand at the edge of an ancient forest where antlers glimmer like ghostly crowns and danger hides behind every bramble. In these tangled woods, aristocrats once gathered under banners bright with family crests. The pretense was simple: a grand hunt, a test of courage, a chance to flaunt falcons and hounds and glittering spears. But not every noble who rode out returned. Some hunts ended not with a stag's cry, but with a sudden silence broken only by the snap of a twig and the hush that follows when men become quarry. It's a fact often buried beneath hunting songs. More than a few titled men vanished among ancient oaks, their final moments hidden beneath leaves and gossip. One duke's disappearance during a boar hunt sparked so many conspiracies that poets made a cottage industry of ballads about the wild woods that eat men whole. Some claim a rival's blade found his back while he knelt to tie a bootlace. Some say a mistress lured him deeper in promising a tryst that turned into a trap. One curious fragment in an old ledger notes how hunting parties sometimes split at dawn. One group pressed the boar. The other pressed an unwanted lord into the underbrush. If his body was found months later, half buried under roots wolves, and time took the blame. Historians still argue whether these hunting disappearances were calculated murders or just the cold cruelty of wild lands. There's no tidy record, just a list of names that rode into mist and never rode out. It's whispered that these hunts became convenient ways to tidy up inheritance knots. A nephew eager for a title, a brother who knew too much, a distant cousin who threatened a marriage pact. Far from the candlelit banquet, the woods offered privacy. A forest does not testify in court. A quirky side note: some hunting parties disguised their weapons as tools for the chase. Blades tucked into hollowed spear shafts, poisoned arrow tips dipped in secret before dawn. Servants who spotted too much often vanished too bound to trees, deep enough that only old roots heard their last breath. Of course, scholars remain divided. Did this happen often enough to shape noble politics? Or are these stories the inventions of scandal-hungry chroniclers? You imagine yourself now, threading between towering trunks, moss soft underfoot. Ahead, riders laugh, sharp nervous sounds that don't reach their eyes. Hounds bark scenting game, or blood. One lord edges away from the main group horse, snorting at shadows. Does he hear branches snap behind him? Is that crack just a deer or something darker? Sometimes these hunting deaths sparked entire wars. One count's accidental fall during a hunt fractured a border agreement, plunging two families into decades of skirmishes. Some treaties were signed on the promise that no more hunting accidents would happen, an ironic clause when hunting was both pastime and pretext for quiet execution. Even the dog's loyal beasts, trained to track boar, could become tools of betrayal. One legend insists a pack was trained to turn on their master at a signal, an outstretched glove, a soft whistle. A bit of myth, perhaps, but the bones unearthed in some hunting grounds suggest more than deer once fed the forest floor. Still, the thrill of the hunt never faded. To ride at dawn, breath misting in the cold horns, singing above the drum of hooves, these moments made noble blood race with purpose. A man felt untouchable in the saddle spear raised to the sky. Yet behind that rush hid the same tension as poison. In the goblet trust was fragile loyalty negotiable, and the forest cared not for titles. Researchers continue to debate whether these forests were really graveyards for secrets or just dangerous playgrounds for men who overestimated their skill with horse and blade. Perhaps it was both. Some lords fell by accident, hoof to head, spear to gut. Others, history leaves them among the roots. Tonight you stand beneath a canopy so thick it swallows the moonlight. Somewhere a horn blows again, but this time it sounds like a warning. Behind you, branches crack. Ahead, laughter echoes. You step deeper, heart drumming with the hoofbeats of vanished nobles who still whisper through the leaves. Deeper in the castle, away from hunting horns and poison-laced goblets, another kind of secret glimmers, one hidden in plain sight, curled around fingers like an innocent band of gold. Rings, so easy to overlook, carried messages more dangerous than any scroll locked in a chest. Imagine your hand resting on an oak table, the weight of a heavy signet pressing into your palm. One twist, one glance at the gemstone's angle, and a wordless pact is sealed. In medieval courts, jewelry spoke its own dialect, a silent language that slipped past guards and scribes alike. It's a verified fact that signet rings weren't just for wax seals. They marked allegiances, disguised forbidden liaisons, and in some cases betrayed their wearer's intentions with a flick of the wrist. A certain pattern engraved inside a band could mark you as loyal to a secret faction, or a certain stone onyx, for descent sapphire for favor, could signal your stance on the latest brewing scandal. A curious detail: one countess in Burgundy owned a ring that twisted open to reveal a tiny scrap of parchment. Inside she hid single words: stay, poison, tonight. Her rivals called her eccentric. Her lovers called her terrifying. Surviving records hint at least two noble feuds that flared from these whispered ring messages. But some scholars remain divided on whether these stories are half folklore, half truth, like so many castle whispers. Picture yourself in a banquet hall. candlelight flickering off velvet sleeves and jeweled hands. Across the table, a duke raises his goblet. He shifts his ring so the emerald faces outward. That's all it takes, a discreet invitation for an ally to slip away and meet him in the stables after midnight. Meanwhile, a rival might notice too late the silent plot already set like a hidden snare. These secret languages of rings weren't always sinister. Sometimes they promised love where words would ruin reputations. A lord's wife might twist her band 3 times during a dance, signaling to her hidden paramour behind the tapestries. A misplaced gesture, however, could be fatal. There are hushed tales of mistresses who wore the wrong stone to the wrong gathering, only to vanish by dawn's first bell. There's no scholarly consensus on just how widespread these coded signals were. Some say they were courtly games, nothing more a flourish of romance and rumor. Others argue that entire conspiracies rested on the turn of a gemstone, the glint of a hidden message slipping through candlelight and gossip. You wander deeper into this imagined hall, trailing the faint scent of rose oil and beeswax polish. A pair of lovers brush hands under the table, their rings clinking softly, like conspirators whispering when everyone else hears only laughter and lute music. A servant watches, eyes narrowed, noting which jewel shifts, which finger lingers. Later, that servant might sell the knowledge for a purse of coins or guard it fiercely until a better price appears. A peculiar anecdote tells of a Venetian merchant who crafted rings with tiny compartments under the stones. One flick and a sliver of paper could be slipped out, burned, or swallowed if discovery loomed. Rumor says he sold these treasures equally to queens and assassins. Some say he died poisoned by a ring of his own, making a dark joke that historians still debate over late into scholarly evenings. The secret language didn't end at the noble's finger either. Rings pass through hands, as bribes, promises, or threats. A ring pressed into a rival's palm during a masked ball could mean, "I know what you did," or "Do what I ask, or I tell." For some families, entire branches of power sprouted from a single signet's quiet promise, the legacy sealed with an imprint in wax, sometimes blood. Imagine the fear of misreading this hidden code. One wrong glance, one careless gesture, and you might find yourself locked in a tower by sunrise, your only crime a misplaced twist of gold. Or worse, a hidden tunnel behind your bedchamber wall, waiting to spirit you away before dawn can reveal the scandal. Researchers continue to unearth these secret histories in letters, ledgers, and crumbling rings unearthed in castle ruins. Some discoveries turn out to be simple heirlooms, plain unremarkable, but a few still bear grooves and hinges, clues to plots lost in the dust of centuries. Now, you stand in that grand hall, candlelight dancing over polished stone. Hands lift goblets, fingers toy with bands of gold and silver. Conspiracies bloom and wilt all in the flick of a ring. Secrets clasped around knuckles, promises pressed against the skin. 1,000 silent conversations that history barely remembers, yet tonight you hear them all. Beyond the flicker of secret rings and the hush of poison-laced banquets lies a quieter, more dangerous risk, love that should never have been spoken, and yet was whispered anyway in candlelit corridors. The forbidden affairs of medieval nobles did more than break hearts. They cracked bloodlines, toppled fortunes, and left behind rumors strong enough to outlive the grandest castles. You stand now in a shadowed solar, the warm hush of Russia's underfoot velvet drapes half drawn to hide 2 figures pressed too close by the hearth's glow. Forbidden lovers, one clad in silk that shouldn't touch common linen, the other draped in titles that can't be inherited if the scandal breaks loose. It's an old truth. Wrapped in silk and secrecy, noble marriages weren't about love. They were contracts, politics stitched together with family crests, and lands that changed hands with the same cold logic as cattle trades. Yet behind every carefully arranged wedding lay a dozen hidden romances that risked all that careful planning. Some were fleeting, an exchanged glance at a feast, a note slipped under a door. Others blossomed into full affairs that carried secrets strong enough to shift kingdoms. A curious fact in some households, secret stairwells connected bedchambers not just for escape, but for rendezvous. A lady's maid might stand guard by a hidden panel, while her mistress met a lover who shouldn't have been anywhere near her wing of the castle. Some letters survive pages scorched at the edges, lines coded in poetry about roses and falcons, but dripping with real danger. One odd detail historians love to argue over how many of these affairs truly changed history. Did a whispered promise between sheets ever decide a war? Some scholars swear it did. They point to the affair between Henry II and Rosamond Clifford, hidden away in a labyrinth at Woodstock. Love turned fortress, turned rumor mill. Others argue that these tales are overblown romances invented by chroniclers desperate for gossip to pad dry ledgers. But the fact remains, the wrong child born from the wrong bed could topple a claim to a throne. More than once, entire noble houses spent decades fighting off rumors that an heir wasn't quite as legitimate as the crest on his signet. One whispered rumor of a midnight tryst could undo a betrothal that took years to broker. In the flickering hush of these hidden romances, servants played their part. The lady's maid, who looked the other way. The page boy, who ran secret notes between wings. The steward, who knew too much and sometimes got paid to keep it buried. Sometimes the lovers themselves carved their stories into beams or scratched symbols into garden walls, tiny acts of rebellion waiting centuries to be uncovered by curious restorers. A peculiar tale lingers in northern France, a countess who fell for her husband's sworn enemy. Their affair was so hush-hush that they met disguised as pilgrims on holy days. It worked until it didn't. One cold dawn, the countess's brother found them near an old shrine and let the gossip run wild instead of the blood. Whether the story's true or embroidered by minstrels, no scholar quite agrees. And so, you stand in this imagined solar warmth, brushing your cheek as the lovers part with a brush of fingertips. Silent promises that could cost them titles, lands, maybe their lives. Outside the castle breathes its usual hush guards, pacing dogs barking at shadows, courtiers dreaming dreams so proper they'd never speak of what drifts behind these drapes. Yet sometimes these hush-hush romances ended in quiet tragedy. A lover exiled under the pretext of treason. A lady quietly sent to a convent where no one dared ask whose child she carried. Some families built entire wings to lock away daughters who strayed their windows, bricked shut, so no letters slipped out to waiting paramours. And still, some lovers outwitted them, all wills rewritten on deathbeds, fortunes slipped through loopholes, bloodlines saved by quick escapes through hidden tunnels that reappear in so many noble tales. These corridors beneath the castle floors echo with the footfalls of desperate hearts, the slap of bare feet on cold stone, as forbidden lovers flee before dawn's judgment. Researchers continue to debate which love affairs were truly world-shaking, which merely fed gossip at firesides. But each hush, each hidden embrace leaves behind a ghost. Tonight, you stand among them, tracing your fingers over faded initials carved into a bedpost. Somewhere the fire snaps, a door creaks, and the secret lingers warm and dangerous behind closed eyes and locked hearts. A cold wind rattles the shutters as you slip from the warmth of forbidden chambers into the darker corners of noble power, a place where love might ruin a family, but accusations could erase one altogether. Tonight, you stand beneath flickering torches in a stone courtyard where shadows gather like a jury. Here the witch trials begin, not the mass panics of villages, but the discreet midnight proceedings nobles use to purge the inconvenient. Picture a small chamber off the great hall, lined with carved benches and damp stone walls that trap whispers like flies in amber. A flickering lantern, a table spread with parchment quills, and a single silver chalice of water to swear false oaths by. The accused stands barefoot skirts, brushing the cold floor eyes, cast down not from guilt, but from the certainty that innocence will do her no favors here. It's a historical fact that many noble families wielded witch trials less as truth-seeking than as tools of political housekeeping. A widow, too defiant, an heir's lover, too vocal, an old healer who knew which lord favored which mistress easier to brand them witches than risk their tongues wagging to the wrong ears. A curious twist. Some records show trials held in secret chambers at night, the accused dragged from their beds by candlelight, questioned until dawn by a private council of family allies. No crowds, no fiery sermons, just parchment, sealed confessions, and a quiet disappearance that left lands and titles unchallenged. Some scholars insist these trials were rare, just courtroom whispers, exaggerated by later storytellers. Others argue that the silence is the point, real hush, real fear, real missing names from the family rolls. Step closer in your mind. Listen to the hush between questions. The accused rarely shouted. They pleaded in soft voices, hopeful a husband or brother would speak in their favor. Sometimes they did more. Often silence was cheaper than loyalty. A single word witch could free a marriage contract, break a scandalous tie, erase a debt of honor. One peculiar detail: noble courts loved symbolic confessions. An embroidered charm sewn into a hem, a dried herb tucked beneath a pillow. Many of these proofs were planted by rivals or desperate servants hoping to buy their own safety for one more winter. One rumor claims a lady of the Bavarian court was undone by a ring of rosemary tucked under her mattress by a jilted maid. Was she truly a witch? Records do not agree. Historians still argue over the scraps of confession she left behind, half burned in the hearth, half kept in the family archive to remind future daughters where loyalty lies. Imagine the candles burning low. A scribe dips his quill again and again, recording each tremble in the accused's voice. The chamber chills with dawn's approach. The lady lowers her eyes, swears what she must. In some hidden cellars, branded irons waited, though these secret trials favored gentler threats, exile, a quiet disappearance behind convent walls, a husband who remarried before the ink dried on the annulment. Sometimes the witch never knew she was accused until she was gone, bundled off in a carriage at dawn, while the castle pretended nothing had happened. Rumors spread through servants' halls, half-truths, traded for safer jobs in other manors. The lady's name vanished from letters, her room stripped and redecorated for a new bride, a new alliance. Scholars continue to debate the truth behind these quiet purges. Some claim the scale is overstated, romanticized into Gothic tales by scandal-hungry pamphleteers centuries later. Others argue the family archives Carefully redacted pages missing hide more than they reveal. Between what's erased and what's invented, the truth drifts like smoke from an unmarked chimney. And you, ghostly witness to this hush, stand at the edge of the candlelight, the smell of tallow thick in the air. You see the noble lord's ring tapping on the table, the scribe's head bowed, the accused's hands clenched in her skirts. A night bird cries beyond the window. Somewhere poison waits in a goblet. Somewhere else a hidden lover sits beside a cold hearth, realizing the bed is empty for good. Yet not all accusations stuck. A few clever souls escape these private witch hunts. A stolen key, a bribe slipped to a guard, a midnight flight through the same secret tunnels once used for whispered affairs. The castle wakes to find the cell empty, the parchment unsigned, the rumor alive, but untethered. Another name, half remembered by the walls. Tonight, you drift with these ghosts, half rumor, half record, across cold stones that once rang with whispered verdicts. In the hush of torchlight, you hear the scratch of quill, the soft drag of a skirt. A cold draft curls beneath the heavy doors. The trial never ends. It only waits for the next secret to silence. Slip from the echo of whispered trials into the deeper veins of stone, where escape is chiseled into walls thicker than any vow. You stand now at the mouth of a tunnel so narrow you must turn sideways to pass fingers brushing damp stone, the stale breath of centuries clinging to your skin. For nobles who spoke too freely or loved too recklessly, these hidden passageways were lifelines, escape routes disguised as shadows. Picture the castle above grand feasts, in firelit halls, hunts in dew-wet forests, secret loves behind velvet curtains. All that splendor balanced on quiet exit doors known only to a select few. It's a well-recorded fact that many medieval castles had concealed passages burrowed into their foundations, some grand enough to lead a rider and his horse to the edge of a distant wood, others so narrow a single person could only crawl candle clenched between teeth. A curious truth, some of these tunnels were so secret that even the master mason who carved them swore an oath never to map them in the official plans. Legends swirl of masons silenced once the final stone was laid, their knowledge too dangerous to trust beyond the grave. Some historians remain skeptical. Was this treachery, or just grim folklore designed to spice up tales told over tankards? Step inside now, feel how the air turns colder with each step. The walls drip with condensation. Lichen clings to low arches. Sometimes these tunnels doubled as drains, or old mine shafts repurposed for flight. In one English stronghold, the so-called priest hole hid more than monks. It served as a bolt hole for a baron's mistress when rumors of witchcraft threatened her freedom. She slipped out one rainy dawn and was never seen again. The local gossips still argue whether she fled to Flanders or froze under the hedgerows. Imagine a desperate lord pressing his hand to a loose panel behind the hearth, feeling the latch click free. A hidden stair curves down the flick of a lantern, throwing shadows against raw stone. Every echo feels like betrayal, waiting to be heard. One wrong step, one careless cough, and the hunt begins above while you vanish below. Not all escapes succeeded. Some tunnels ended in deadfalls, stone traps rigged to crush any traitor who wasn't careful with the secret. A few ended at iron gates, locked from the outside, promises of freedom that turned to tombs when conspirators betrayed each other for gold. Researchers continue to debate which tales are true and which were invented by lords eager to boast that their castle was a fortress and a phantom door all at once. You follow the path now in your mind's eye. Feel the stale air, smell the damp earth. Hear the shuffle of slippers on old flagstones. Sometimes, escape was planned in advance, a trunk of coins buried in a hollow tree, a boat waiting downstream under moonlight. Other times, it was desperation alone, a last sprint into darkness, with nothing but the hope that the tunnel's mouth hadn't collapsed since the last secret lover crept through. One quirky fragment from a German fortress describes a tunnel that emptied out in the middle of a village well. A fleeing lord would drop through a dry shaft, crawl through cold mud, and surface beneath the cover of a morning market. Historians argue whether this was engineering genius or storytelling bravado, perhaps both. Either way, the well still stands, a moss-choked reminder that freedom can be just a stone's throw from betrayal. Sometimes these tunnels served more mundane sins, smuggling spices, moving forbidden books, ferrying messages past prying stewards. A baron's chambermaid might slip into a passage with a love note only to cross paths with a steward hauling a keg of brandy meant to dodge the king's taxes. Below stairs, loyalty and law blurred underfoot. Imagine the fear humming through your bones as you crouch in the dark ear pressed to a stone door. Above footsteps, thump guards searching rooms, rattling latches. Below you hold your breath and pray the roots don't give you away. The castle's heartbeat is muffled down here. The world narrows to candle sputter cold stone, a secret path between ruin and rescue. Researchers still crawl through these hidden guts. Today, archaeologists squeezing through half-collapsed passages, mapping routes that once saved necks from the noose or the blade. Some emerge into daylight with more questions than answers. Who fled here? Who failed? Whose bones crumble in the dark corner no one dares to clear? Tonight you stand at the mouth of that tunnel, your shadow flickering against centuries-old walls. Behind you, betrayal poison whispers of witchcraft. Ahead, a bend in the dark, the promise that somewhere past the roots and rocks, freedom waits for those willing to vanish when the castle doors slam shut. Beyond the stone tunnels and whispered midnights lies a quieter thread, one carried not by lords or knights, but by men who could never claim a title, yet held enough secrets to topple any noble family. You stand now in the soft hush of a royal bedchamber, heavy drapes drawn tight, while a figure waits in the corner, unassuming robe cinched at the waist, eyes sharp as a dagger's edge. The eunuch confidant, neither entirely trusted nor ever truly free. It's a curious truth of medieval courts, where kings and counts trusted no cousin or brother. They trusted the man with no heirs and no claim to lands. The eunuch's role, borrowed from Byzantium and Persia, slipped westward into Europe's darker chambers. Some historians argue these figures were mere attendants, keepers of keys, guardians of doors. Others insist they were living vaults of gossip, the final link in a chain of power few dared rattle. Picture yourself watching a noble family at supper. Behind the duke's carved chair stands a figure in a plain tunic, eyes lowered, yet ears tuned to every bite of scandal that slips past red lips. He knows who is owed money, who sneaks letters after dusk, who fears which rival's blade. When the hall empties and laughter fades, he alone remains to sweep the ashes and carry the secrets down cold corridors. One peculiar account tells of a Sicilian eunuch who once decided a queen's fate with a single sentence spoken behind a silk screen. He never wrote a word. His tongue was the pen, his memory the scroll. No parchment to burn, no proof to seize. Some say he vanished the same night his mistress fell ill from suspicious stew. Did he flee? Did he die? Surviving letters disagree, historians bicker, and the truth drifts like smoke above cold stone floors. These confidants rarely appear in family portraits. They stand at the edge, one hand resting on a door latch, ready to vanish should the wind of power change direction. Many were boys taken from far-off markets, stripped of the future they might have owned. Yet within the narrow walls of a lord's chambers, they wielded an invisible blade, trust no cousin could match. Step closer, hear the muffled rustle of parchment. A noble whispers into an ear that won't betray him with a child or a claim. The eunuch nods, files the rumor away, perhaps for safekeeping, perhaps for leverage when winter winds blow cold and gratitude turns stingy. One odd footnote: some of these trusted men learned to read and write in a half-dozen tongues. They became living archives of love affairs, murders, plotted fortunes, shifted. A misplaced word could collapse a treaty. A well-timed rumor could crown a bastard son as the rightful heir. Some scholars remain divided. Did these confidants truly pull strings, or were they shadows blamed for sins that needed a scapegoat? There are letters carefully folded, smuggled between cities, that hint at the power hidden in a quiet nod. A noble lady's confession, scrawled in hurried Latin. A secret cure for poison. A bribe offered, refused, accepted after all. Yet no record ever pins blame to the man in the corner sleeve's spotless voice soft. Imagine standing in a royal nursery where a prince sleeps soundly. The eunuch sits by the fire stirring embers, eyes darting to the door at every creak. His silence buys him safety, but only so long as no other silence replaces him. One day, the child grows up, forgets the soft voice that soothed his night terrors. Grown kings have no patience for living reminders of their father's darkest whispers, and yet some survived entire dynasties. A curious tale from a Spanish court tells of one such figure who served 3 generations, his secrets buried so deep that even the king's archivists could not coax them out. When he died, they say he left nothing behind but a locked chest containing only a cracked comb and a single ring. No notes, no confessions, no parchment to feed the rumor mills. You stand now in the hush of these old chambers, among the scent of burnt candles and dusty drapes. You feel the weight of secrets pressed into corners like hidden treasures. Somewhere behind a velvet curtain, the quiet shape of trust breathes shallowly, listening to footsteps echo down the corridor. Historians continue to argue about the true reach of these men, whether they were pawns or quiet kings in plain robes. But here, in the half-light, you know better power doesn't always wear a crown. Sometimes it carries a basin, holds a cloak, bows its head, and never once forgets what you confessed when you thought the walls could not hear. Step softly now into the candlelit library, where promises echo longer than laughter. Here, among cracked tomes and creaking shelves, blood oaths and family curses coil through generations like ivy through stone. While poison and tunnels did their work in secret, these sworn words shaped destinies in ways a blade never could. Picture yourself in a high, drafty hall lit by rushlights. At its center, a circle of nobles stand shoulder to shoulder, hands clasped above a battered altar. Each palm is nicked by a dagger's tip, just enough to draw a single bead of red. A drop falls on old oak-binding cousin to cousin, brother to brother. In this room, the word family means loyalty, stronger than fear, or so they hope. It's a historical fact that medieval noble houses guarded their power, not only with armies, but with whispered pacts. A blood oath sworn before witnesses could bind 2 families into a tangle of debts and favors impossible to untwist without betrayal. Sometimes these vows were private sealed behind chapel doors, with priests bribed into silence. Other times, entire villages gathered to watch their lord promise fealty to a stronger neighbor, his palm dripping his smile tight as winter rope. A curious twist: not all blood oaths were forged to strengthen ties. Some protected secrets darker than poison. If a family hid an illegitimate heir or buried a crime in the orchard at dawn, an oath stitched the silence tight. Break that vow, and ruin followed, sometimes in the form of a curse whispered by a half-blind matriarch, her words turning milk sour and crops thin for years after her bones rested beneath a mossy stone. One peculiar record from Ireland tells of a clan that swore each new heir to secrecy about an ancient betrayal so old no one alive quite remembered its shape. Yet every son drew a knife across his palm, just the same murmuring words no scribe dared write down. Some historians insist this was superstition dressed in ritual. Others argue the thread of shame alone kept the oath alive longer than any parchment could. You drift closer, in your mind's eye smell the iron tang of fresh cuts, the smoke of tallow candles guttering low. Somewhere, a cousin's eyes flick sideways, measuring his brother's grip on the dagger. Loyalty, or ambition, who can say which, hums louder in the dark. These oaths wove into curses when trust snapped. An uncle's broken promise might summon a mother's wrath turned legend. Some families believed these curses ran like blood itself, generation after generation, marked by stillbirths, failed harvests, sudden falls from high towers. Researchers continue to argue whether such tales were real or just convenient blame for bad luck that needed a villain. Yet old ledgers tell of lands abandoned when the curse grew too loud to ignore. One odd detail: certain families carried tokens, rings, bones, scraps of cloth, believed to hold the oath's power. A knight might wear a strip of blood-stained linen under his armor, as proof he'd sworn never to turn on his lord, even if coin tempted him otherwise. If that linen vanished or was stolen, the oath was said to unravel like frayed rope in a winter storm. Picture a cold chamber behind the main hall. A boy no older than 16 stands trembling before his grandfather's coffin. He presses a thumb to the dead man's lips, whispers a vow through chattering teeth. He promises to guard the family's secret, perhaps a hidden heir, perhaps a buried chest of coins no king must find. Break that promise, the old stories say, and the house's stones themselves would crack and tumble into ruin. Historians sift through letters hinting at such oaths, fragments in the margins of otherwise mundane ledgers. Do not speak of the orchard. The well behind the east wall must remain sealed. Instructions that read like riddles to modern eyes, yet once bound cousins in knots stronger than iron bars. Imagine standing now in that flickering hall, the last candle sputtering against cold stone. You see the young lord press a cloth to his palm, feel the hush settle as his blood joins the old stains on the altar. Above a draft stirs the banners carrying whispers of curses older than any crown resting on the castle's shelf. Researchers disagree whether these blood oaths were superstition or strategy, shadow or sword. But here in the hush of old stones and old wounds, you sense the truth that lingers behind every whispered vow. Sometimes the sharpest blade is the one pressed softly against your own skin, promising silence, demanding loyalty, binding the living to the dead. Past the hush of blood oaths and whispered curses, you drift into a chamber thick with the sour sweet scent of herbs and the scratch of quills over stained scrolls. Here beneath vaulted beams and flickering rushlights, the alchemist waits a shadow in a robe too fine for his station, peddling miracles, and menace to nobles whose ambition always outpaced their wisdom. Imagine standing at the edge of a cluttered study. Glass vials glint in the firelight, copper alembics bubble softly, and somewhere in the tangle of parchment and powder sits a man who promises life everlasting, or a discreet death disguised as a cure. It's a well-trodden truth of late medieval courts when brute force failed and poison proved too blunt, the cunning turned to alchemists whose potions blurred the line between healing and harm. One curious fact: not every alchemist dreamed of gold. Many found more lucrative patrons in the pockets of dukes and barons who feared old age as much as betrayal. These court alchemists brewed tinctures to stiffen a failing spine, pastes to sweeten sour breath before delicate negotiations, drafts to coax a barren womb to bloom with heirs. Yet for every promised remedy, another bottle waited in secret, something darker, a sip strong enough to erase a rival or dull a nagging heir's claim. Step closer, and you might catch a whiff of rosemary masking arsenic, or a hint of frankincense curling around mercury-laced wine. Some noble families treated these healers like prized hunting dogs, fed well when useful, beaten or banished when rumors turned sour. One French count history tells us kept 3 alchemists on retainer, 1 for potions of power, 1 for poisons disguised as sleeping draughts, and a 3rd to spy on the other 2. Some historians argue this was paranoia run wild. Others claim the count died peacefully because he trusted no single cure. You picture now a cautious lord drumming jeweled fingers on the oak armrest as the alchemist pours a glowing liquid into a goblet. A promise slips from cracked lips. "This will strengthen your blood, my lord." And yet behind those words, a price of favor owed, a secret kept. Should the lord grow suspicious, the alchemist might vanish into the night with a single satchel of notes, recipes no steward dares to replicate for fear of waking the wrong ghosts. One peculiar detail survives in the margins of an English ledger, a note describing a shadowed fellow who sold a potion said to cure the pox and lighten the liver's humors while quietly draining the victim's strength day by day. He vanished after a baron's sudden death, leaving only cracked flasks and stained scrolls that no priest could bless. Researchers continue to argue if this figure was charlatan or genius proof of medieval medicine's cunning edge, or merely a tale scribes used to spice up dull tax rolls. Yet the line between miracle and murder was always thin. One month, the alchemist might sweeten a lady's breath with rose syrup before her wedding. The next, he might slip foxglove into her husband's cup when the dowry proved too small. Many kept coded books, receipts of remedies scribbled in half Latin, half symbol, meant to dazzle suspicious eyes and cloak dangerous secrets behind learned nonsense. You linger here now, candlelight glinting off glass beakers and iron crucibles. A soft bubbling fills the hush as gold leaf curls in a shallow dish, the scent of vinegar stinging your nose. Somewhere outside the castle snores in drunken peace, unaware that ambition brews stronger than any wine in the buttery. The alchemist leans close to a scribe, muttering a final measurement, a final warning. The scribe's quill scratches a name into a hidden ledger, another client whose secrets are worth more than the coins tucked into the alchemist's sleeve. One odd twist: these healers sometimes tested their potions on the same servants who fetched wood and hauled water. A sudden cough, a pale cheek signs that a dose needed more honey, less hemlock. No record lists how many vanished into shallow graves behind the herb garden. Some scholars argue it was rare. Others say the bones beneath castle orchards tell a quieter truth. Imagine it now, the rush of night air as you slip from the chamber, leaving behind the hush of vials and coded scrolls. Somewhere in the shadows, a noble lifts a goblet, trusting that the next sip will bring vigor and fortune, never suspecting that the miracle, like all gifts here, comes wrapped in quiet ruin. Historians still debate whether these court alchemists were true sages or clever frauds dancing at the edge of treason. But tonight, you know better than to trust the man who promises gold from lead life from dust. You know some secrets, ferment best when bottled tight, uncorked, only when ambition demands a drop of poison sweetened with hope. Beyond the hush of bribes and bubbling flasks, the grand halls of power found one last disguise for treachery: velvet masks and candlelit balls where secrets pirouetted behind painted faces. Step now into the music and murmurs of a noble masquerade, where betrayal passed hand to hand in silken gloves, and laughter drowned out the shuffle of hidden daggers. Picture yourself standing at the top of a marble stairway. Below the ballroom, swirls with color, gilded masks, feathered headdresses, velvet cloaks that hide smiles and threats in equal measure. The air hums with the soft clash of wine goblets, the sigh of silk skirts brushing past. Here, under the glow of crystal chandeliers, nobles danced out their plots with grace learned from tutors and desperation honed by centuries of cunning. It's a well-told fact that masquerades weren't merely entertainments. They were theaters of power, a chance to watch rivals stumble, to whisper promises that the daylight would never allow. A baron might waltz with the wife of a foe, his gloved hand passing a folded note from palm to palm, masked by a polite laugh and the flicker of a fan. By dawn, a treaty might crumble, or a dagger find its mark in an unlit corridor. A curious detail: some hosts designed these parties with secret alcoves tucked behind tapestries and false doors leading to servant corridors. Nobles vanished behind velvet curtains to whisper conspiracies safe from prying ears. A wrong step, however, might land you face to face with another masked schemer, promises clashing like swords beneath the muffled strains of violins. One peculiar record from Florence describes a masquerade where each mask's color signaled allegiance: blue for the loyalists, gold for the traitors, crimson for the watchers waiting to choose the winning side. The chronicler claimed the host used these masks to test his guests, who whispered to who dared trade colors in shadowed corners. Some scholars dismiss this as fanciful gossip. Others insist the mask fragments found in the villa's hidden rooms prove something darker than mere revelry. Step further in, now drifting between swirling dancers. Feel the hush beneath the music, the tension behind each polite laugh. A young lord adjusts his mask eyes, darting through the candlelight for a promised ally. A lady, half hidden behind peacock feathers, presses a sealed letter into his gloved palm. Somewhere nearby, a rival watches from behind a black velvet half mask, already planning which secret might fetch a higher price by dawn. It wasn't always murder these balls masked. Sometimes they hid affairs, debts, or oaths, broken with the slip of a ribbon. A masked ball meant freedom to speak words forbidden in the bright heat of day. But freedom came at a price. The masks came off when the sun rose, and so did excuses. A rumor born behind a silver filigree could end a marriage faster than poison. One odd twist: some masquerades included staged murders, a guest plucked from the dance floor with a dramatic scream, only to reappear later in fresh costume. Meant to amuse, these games sometimes blurred into reality. One Venetian count disappeared during a staged death only to be found for real days later in a canal mask still tied to his drowned face. Was it a prank gone wrong, or a convenient end for a man who knew too much? Historians still debate letters half burned and gossip long faded. Beneath the masks moved the servants plain-faced among painted nobles. They ferried wine and secrets with equal care, eyes lowered but ears sharp. Many masquerades found their true cost not in spilled wine, but in spilled names, sold later in taverns, a price paid in coin, or quiet freedom from a debt owed. Imagine now a hush at the edge of the dance. A masked figure lingers near the stair hand, tucked behind his cloak. A flash of steel glimmers beneath the silk, one thrust in the crush of bodies, hidden by laughter. A body propped against a column to look like sleep until the final violin note fades. Some killings were that quiet. No scream, no chase, just a mask left behind in a pool of spilled wine and rumor. Researchers continue to argue whether these balls shaped history or simply mirrored the quiet treacheries of daylight court life. Did a single masked whisper decide a boarder's fate? Did a velvet mask hide the true heir? A bastard child slipped into a dance to replace a sickly prince. The records remain half lies, scribbled in diaries, locked in castle chests. Tonight, you drift among them. Velvet against your cheek. Candlelight, dancing off glass goblets. Music swells. Laughter rises like perfume. And behind each painted smile, a secret waits quiet as poison fleeting as a lover's mask dropped on cold marble at dawn. Slip away from the swirl of velvet masks and candlelit betrayals, and follow the hush down a narrower hall, where the real weapons of noble power were softer than blades, yet cut deeper, letters folded tight, hidden in embroidered sleeves, slip between fingers under flickering sconces. Here, in the quiet corners of castle walls, blackmail breathed softly secrets traded in velvet pockets, each folded note worth a crown or a coffin. Picture yourself in a private study, the door half cracked, so only the trusted may pass. A noble sits at an oak desk, head bent low over parchment. By the fire's weak light, a quill scratches a single name, a single sin truth twisted into a threat. Folded once, twice, sealed with wax, no king's guard would question. In an hour, it will be slipped beneath a rival's pillow or handed to a trembling maid with promises of silver for silence. It's a plain but brutal fact of court life. While poison killed the body, blackmail killed the soul. A lord who feared no blade might tremble at the rumor of a hidden affair, an unpaid debt, a bastard heir lurking in a distant convent. For every secret spoken aloud, a dozen more waited folded in sleeves, carried through stone hallways by servants whose eyes never rose higher than a noble's chin. A curious footnote from an old German ledger lists the cost of paper secrets alongside spices and salted fish. Proof historians say that a letter's worth could outweigh gold. Entire fortunes shifted on single scraps of ink. One countess famously ruined her cousin's marriage by dropping a letter at a feast accidentally, so she claimed. The truth she'd written it herself forged a lover's name and watched the scandal crack an alliance her husband hated. Step deeper now, past the desk and into the hush behind the wall. Here, blackmail letters traded hands, not with the flourish of a ring or a poisoned chalice, but with a nod, a slip of parchment, a single coin pressed into a palm. A steward might deliver a sealed note tucked under a platter of roasted pheasant. A lady's maid might hide one in a sleeve of fresh linens. Sometimes the threat never needed to be read aloud. Just the weight of the letter in a pocket was enough to bend a proud neck low. One peculiar detail: some nobles turned blackmail into an art form. They wrote their secrets themselves, confessions inked in delicate Latin, carefully worded to appear accidental if discovered, but perfectly damning when delivered to the right rival. A duke in Brittany famously penned false confessions about debts he never owed, leaking them piece by piece to control which cousin pressed too close for inheritance. Scholars still bicker whether this was cunning genius or the desperate play of a man whose lands crumbled under real debts he never confessed. Imagine a hush in the servants' corridor tonight. A young page stands by the kitchen door, palms sweating around a folded note. He's promised a silver coin for its safe passage, yet knows if caught, the same note might hang him higher than any stable thief. Upstairs, a lady reclines on silk cushions, fingers tracing the edge of another sealed letter. One she'll never open, but keep, just in case her husband forgets who truly holds the reins in this cold stone hall. Some letters lived on long after their authors fell silent. Hidden behind fireplace stones tucked beneath floorboards, slipped into forgotten codices. Modern scholars still stumble on them, faded ink, warning of secret lovers, hidden gold betrayals never carried out. Some historians argue these notes were half myth, half desperate scrawlings by bored scribes. Others claim they shaped dynasties as surely as a crown. One odd tale tells of a blackmail letter so powerful it crossed 3 kingdoms without ever being read. A courier carried it in a hollowed-out walking stick, stopping in taverns where rumors bloomed like fungus. When the courier was killed in a back alley, the letter vanished. Some say burned, some say hidden, some say read aloud to the wrong ear. No one agrees who wrote it, but they all whisper that a single piece of parchment turned a duke into a pauper before the winter ended. Tonight, you drift among these folded secrets. Feel the weight of parchment in your palm, the warm wax seal pressing into your thumb. Somewhere a door creaks, a hush carries a promise through torchlit corridors, a name spoken in the wrong ear, a debt repaid not with gold, but with silence. Researchers still debate whether blackmail was a tool of the desperate or the crown of the cunning. But you know here in this hush, behind stone walls and velvet pockets, that the sharpest dagger sometimes fits best inside an envelope, carried not on a belt, but in a sleeve, waiting to pierce the heart with ink alone. Slip deeper into the castle's hush, past the echo of letters and velvet pockets, until you find yourself standing at the threshold of a grand hall, glittering with candlelight and danger disguised as celebration. Tonight the air tastes of spiced wine and roasted boar, yet beneath the laughter and toasts drifts a sharper tang fear. Here at these treacherous feasts, a single sip could end a dynasty before the final course was served. Picture the long banquet table, groaning under silver platters, suckling pigs, glazed with honey trenchers, piled with pastries, stuffed with raisins and almonds. Goblets brimming with mulled wine, fragrant with clove and cinnamon. Noble guests chatter behind embroidered sleeves, forks tapping plates carved with family crests. Somewhere in this polite chaos, a cup sits heavier than the rest, a toast laced not with good wishes, but with ruin. It's a fact whispered in castle kitchens. Poisonings weren't always grand conspiracies. Sometimes they were quiet small tragedies tucked between courses. A bit of crushed nightshade hidden in a stew. A splash of arsenic swirled in a cup of sweet hippocras. One sip too many, one unlucky bite, and a rival's ambition collapsed into silence before the servants cleared the trenchers. A curious footnote from an old French court describes a grand wedding feast where guests rose for the first toast only to see the groom collapse into his gilded cup. Rumors swirled for decades. Was it a jealous brother, a spurned mistress, a political rival who feared the union? The surviving ledgers list every goose and pie served that night, but say nothing of the poison. Historians still bicker over whether the story is truth or tavern, gossip grown fat on repetition. Step closer now. Imagine the quiet panic behind the dais. A lady's maid glances at the Lord's cup, her hands trembling as she pours another round. Somewhere near the hearth, a steward watches the guests with hooded eyes, noting who drinks and who pretends. Some feasts employed tasters, young boys, or trusted knights sworn to swallow a mouthful first. But loyalty has limits, and gold has a way of turning a taster's head or stilling his tongue altogether. One peculiar detail: noble families often invited their enemies to feasts precisely because it offered a chance to mend ties or sever them entirely. A toast to new alliances doubled as a test. Drink Smile survived the night, and the deal was sealed. Refuse the cup and risk a scandal worse than death. Many a nervous guest lifted goblets with trembling fingers, prayers murmured between forced smiles. You drift behind a cluster of lords laughing too loudly over spiced venison. One leans close, his jeweled ring tapping the rim of another's goblet. A promise or a threat, hard to say which. When the minstrels strike up a tune, the hall's hush deepens beneath the music. Servants slip between benches, jugs balanced on shoulders, eyes flicking from plate to plate. Some carry secret signs, a knot in an apron, a feather tucked into a sleeve, to mark which cup must be avoided, which dish should never touch the Lord's plate. Historians argue over the true body count behind these treacherous feasts. Some claim the threat of poison was greater than its practice fear, enough to keep lords' loyal tongues, careful alliances tight as wine-soaked tablecloths. Others insist the graveyards behind many a castle orchard prove otherwise sudden fevers. Mysterious stomach pains, entire lines ended with nothing more than a ladle and a whispered order in the buttery. One odd story clings to the Scottish Highlands, a clan that celebrated each harvest with a massive feast where every guest was required to drink from the same horn. Legend says an ambitious cousin slipped hemlock into the horn's rim, but forgot to account for the rotation order. He drank first, and by the time the horn reached his rival, he was already slumped against the rushes, undone by his own cleverness. Scholars still smile at the tale, unsure whether it's truth or local folklore grown long in the telling. Imagine it now, the hush that falls when a guest coughs too hard, when a goblet clatters to the floor. Eyes flick toward the host, whose smile freezes at the edges. A servant rushes to clear the spill. A harp plucks a lively tune to drown uneasy whispers. The feast continues, laughter forced and wine flowing, but every cup carries the weight of possibility. Drink deeply, taste trust, or sip, carefully taste fear. Researchers still debate whether these poison banquets were widespread terror or rare exceptions dressed up by chroniclers eager for scandal. But here, under the candlelight's soft flicker, you see the truth shimmering in goblets lifted high. Sometimes the most dangerous blade in a noble's hall was not sheathed at a knight's hip, but swirling quiet and sweet in a toast made too eagerly too soon. Beyond the flicker of treacherous feasts and the whisper of goblets lifted with trembling hands, there drifts another shadow at the edges of noble tapestries, children born of secrets hidden away behind thick curtains and thicker lies. Tonight you find yourself standing at the edge of a candlelit nursery that should not exist, peering into the hush where the secret bastard heir takes his first breath. Picture a quiet chamber, tucked in the castle's oldest wing. The fire burns low, casting shadows that hide the midwife's careful frown. A baby cries, healthy lungs, sharp wail, but no herald will ever trumpet his name. No nurse will sing lullabies of inheritance. His father's crest might one day hang over his cradle, but only when the last of the legitimate sons fail to survive their poisoned goblets and hunting accidents. It's an unspoken truth that in noble houses the lineage was prized above all. Yet desire had a way of slipping past locked doors and arranged marriages. One reckless night, between a lord and a maid, a whispered promise to a distant cousin, a lady's hush-hush affair with a visiting knight. The result, swaddled now in linen, and secrets posed a danger greater than any dagger. One curious fact, entire wings of castles were built to house wards and foundlings, children given polite excuses but no real claim. Sometimes they were sent to monasteries before they could speak. Other times they were raised alongside true heirs, trained as loyal companions, yet watched like foxes in the henhouse. Some grew up ignorant of their own blood, wearing simple tunics, while their half-brothers wore silk and gold. A peculiar rumor from Burgundy tells of a baron whose secret son, trained in the stables alongside the household knights, never knowing he was the insurance policy should plague or poison empty the main line. On his father's deathbed, the boy was summoned clothed in fine velvet, given a signet ring warm from the dead man's palm, and crowned the heir before the grieving legitimate cousins could protest. Some scholars still argue whether this tale is embroidered legend or an uncomfortable truth buried in too many bricked-up nursery doors. Step closer now. Imagine the hush when the child's mother, perhaps a lady's maid, perhaps a noble cousin, slips back to her chamber, hiding tears behind a candle's flicker. Outside the door, a steward stands guard, not to protect the child, but to keep the story contained. Servants know. Of course, servants always know. They whisper over steaming cauldrons and behind laundry lines, trading tales of whose blood flows in which cradle. One odd detail survives in a battered household ledger entries for silk bonnets and goat's milk delivered to a ward of the East Wing. No name, no title, just line after line of careful payments to keep the child fed, clothed, invisible. Historians dig through these fragile clues, hoping to match faceless names to portraits with familiar jawlines or eyes that mirror the Lord's too closely to be coincidence. You drift now through this hush, past the cradle where the baby sleeps, past the nurse, dozing with a rosary in her lap. In the garden outside, a legitimate heir chases fireflies with a silver whistle. Inside, the secret child curls tiny fingers around nothing but shadows and the faint promise that if luck and intrigue align, he might someday trade linen for velvet. Sometimes these bastard heirs were pawns raised only to be used in desperate plots. A rival lord might pluck one from obscurity, claim him publicly as the rightful son, and march him at the head of a rebellion to split a kingdom in two. Other times the child never knew his bloodline until a drunken uncle whispered it by a hearth years too late to claim anything more than the burden of a truth that could never be spoken aloud. There is no scholarly consensus on how many secret heirs truly threaten noble lines, but the rumors alone shaped families like storms shaping cliffs. Some bastards found their place marrying into distant branches, carving small fortunes far from the ancestral seat. Others vanished in the hush, shipped off to quiet monasteries where family secrets were bound by vows of silence and cold stone walls. Imagine the hush that falls when years later the hidden heir returns a grown man with his father's eyes and a paper trail long enough to shake the great hall's pillars. Or maybe he returns only as rumor a letter from a foreign court, a claim made over a cup of wine, a threat carried on the edge of a mercenary's blade. Tonight, you stand at the cradle's edge, the soft rush of the baby's breath, a ghost of future chaos. Somewhere down the corridor, a noble father drinks his wine and laughs too loudly, never guessing that his greatest rival might be swaddled in linen a few doors away, waiting, growing, dreaming in the hush. Slip now from the hush of secret nurseries into the colder hush of earth and stone, where the final secrets lie buried beneath moss and tangled roots. Here at the edge of an old castle graveyard, you stand among crooked headstones and unmarked mounds, wondering which truths the nobles buried alongside the bones they dared not name. Picture it, a chill dawn fog curling low over damp grass. A pair of men stand knee-deep in muddy soil behind the orchard wall, shovels scraping at frost-bitten ground. There is no priest, no tolling bell, no grieving crowd clad in black. Only the quiet scrape of iron, the soft thud of a body lowered, where no chronicler will ever record it. In this hush, legacies are protected not by marble tombs, but by silence and a grave no air will ever tend. It's a cold fact that behind every noble line polished for history books, there linger stories that never made it to the family tree. A chambermaid found dead after whispering too much. A cousin too curious about the legitimacy of an heir. A steward who saw something in a moonlit corridor and found himself slipping beneath the orchard's roots before dawn. Some historians call these tales exaggeration, courtly gossip, spun by board servants and later romanticized by scribes. Yet the shallow graves keep appearing century after century wherever power was hungry enough to dig. Step closer now. Imagine the hush between shovel strokes, the muttered curses of the men bribed to handle this final task. They know they'll be paid well to forget paid better if they never speak of what they saw. The ring slipped off a cold finger, the scrap of silk torn from a sleeve, the faint bruise on a pale throat. They will drink away the memory, spend the coins in taverns far from these walls, and pray no curious historian ever digs deeper. One curious fragment in a centuries-old letter hints at a hidden burial ground behind an Irish manor house, rows of stones with no names, just blank markers to keep livestock away. Locals say the soil there never stays settled, as if the past itself refuses to lie still. Some scholars argue these sites were plague pits, convenient places to lay the unclaimed dead. Others suspect they were something more deliberate, a ledger of secrets erased by moonlight and shovels. A peculiar detail in some noble estates maps survive that show every tower wall and garden except the tiny corner where the earth dips strangely, where no fruit trees ever grow. Older servants know better than to speak of these spots. They drop flowers on them when no one is watching, a quiet nod to the forgotten souls whose only gravestone is rumor. Imagine wandering through this hush mist curling around your ankles, the smell of wet earth clinging to your cloak. You pause by a stone so weathered its inscription vanished 100 winters ago. Was this a loyal steward buried in secret to hide a scandal? A mistress whose belly swelled with the wrong bloodline? Or an unlucky rival silenced at a treacherous feast and hurried out of sight before the cock crowed? Some nobles left hints behind, an odd line in a will, a scribbled note tucked inside a chapel wall. Let the orchard keep what we cannot. Historians pore over these scraps, piecing together fragments of a darker family portrait that never quite holds still. One generation's sin buried to save the next generation's claim. One grave traded for 10 years of silence at court. Researchers still argue how much truth these unmarked graves hold. Were they as common as rumor insists? Or are they the echoes of superstition? The human need to explain sudden disappearances and old feuds with ghost stories and shallow soil. The debate rustles through castle libraries and dusty archives, yet the hush remains a silence so complete it feels alive. You stand now at the edge of this graveyard, boots damp with dew, breath ghosting in the dawn chill. Somewhere behind you, the castle hums with life banquets, secrets, blood oaths, and betrayals circling above, while the orchard roots wrap tight around truths no crown ever wanted unearthed. Maybe the stones will hold their silence. Or maybe when no one is watching, the earth will shift, the roots will split, and the buried truths will breathe again. Tonight, or tomorrow, or centuries hence, someone will stand where you stand, now tracing fingers over cold stone, wondering what stories sleep here under tangled ivy, and the hush of centuries too stubborn to die. Yet not every secret was buried deep. Some lingered in candlelit rooms, carried on quiet footsteps, and sealed behind heavy curtains, waiting for the right ears to catch them. You slip into the hush of a royal bedchamber, where the walls are thick, but the gossip thicker. By day, these spy maids, some no older than 16, appear to fuss over linens, starch collars, and sweep cinders from under gilded beds. By night, they become accidental archivists of every scandalous whisper, traded between silk sheets and velvet drapes. You imagine the scent of beeswax candles and sweet herbs stuffed in rush mats barely masking the musk of secret rendezvous. Historians still argue whether these servants truly kept diaries of what they heard or simply traded secrets for favors when the moment was ripe. What's clear is this: in castles, from York to Florence, chamber boys and maids knew whose dagger was hidden under whose pillow, whose lover snuck through which servant door, and which noble dreamed aloud in drunken murmurs. Take a step closer to the massive four-poster bed, its canopy heavy with embroidered roses that conceal more than shadows. A chamber boy kneels by the hearth, stoking embers just enough to warm his master's toes, but not enough to melt the frost of suspicion lingering in the air. One accidental creak of the floorboard could spell death or promotion. And so they learned to move like mist. In the hush between flickering candlelight and dawn's gray hush, these invisible listeners pieced together a web no court scribe could ever fully record. They knew which dowager countess was poisoning her second husband's wine with foxglove, and which visiting duke confided family debts to his mistress moments before falling asleep. Some scholars remain puzzled by the lack of written confessions. The few scraps we find, crumpled letters, scribbled servant notes, hint at a network of traded secrets so vast it makes modern tabloids look like polite dinner conversation. You wonder how many monarchs ruled kingdoms that trembled only because a chambermaid decided not to squeak a single word at the wrong time. It wasn't all espionage and scandal. Some of these quiet witnesses found themselves caretakers of confessions so heavy they slept with rocks under their pillows to keep the guilt pinned down. Others slipped coded warnings to rebels and foreign spies, their messages stitched into hems or tucked behind loose bricks in the cellar. Imagine finding a traitor's confession hidden inside the lining of a lady's corset, washed and rewashed, but never truly clean. In those same rooms, while nobles plotted betrayals over goblets of spiced wine, the maids leaned in eyes, downcast hearts pounding. They memorized passwords, secret alliances, birth secrets, facts too dangerous for parchment, but safe within an obedient mind. Some survived decades this way, loyal only to the coin that rustled under their mattress. Some did not survive at all. Picture the lanterns, guttering low, the hush of a final sigh, when a lord's last breath escapes, and a servant stands witness her hands, still smoothing the sheets that will be sold as relics one day. There is no record of her name, but her secrets remain drifting like candle smoke in a room no one ever checks twice. Even now, centuries later, archivists dig through dusty ledgers and letters looking for the fingerprints of these invisible spies. A scrap of linen with a name stitched in blue thread. A sealed confession from a noble whose downfall was whispered into the wrong ear. And always the same question: who else knew? You can almost hear the faint rustle of skirts in the dark hallway outside, a cough disguised as a knock, a whisper caught by cold stone walls. In this kingdom of murmurs, the real power was never on the throne. It was kneeling by the fire, sweeping the ashes, folding a secret between bed sheets, scented with lavender and scandal. A flicker of kitchen fire, a hush behind the pantry door. Now you drift closer to the cooks who season more than just soup blades hidden under flour sacks, secrets folded like pastry dough. In the rattling, drafty sculleries beneath castles and manor halls, cooks were the silent architects of trust and betrayal. By day, they stirred thick stews and roasted boar for feasts that might last until dawn. By night, some ladled out death in bowls that smelled of rosemary and wine. Picture the vast iron pots, the echo of knives on wooden blocks, the hiss of fat spitting from goose flesh, turning on a spit. In these simple noises hid the craft of the poisoner cook, trusted by hungry masters, forgotten by history. Researchers continue to debate just how common it was for kitchen staff to dabble in subtle assassinations. Some claim it was rare, too risky, too easy to trace. Others insist recipes were sometimes little more than coded murder plans, passed from one trusted cook to the next with a wink and a well-wrapped bundle of suspicious herbs. Imagine the irony. A lord's personal taste tester trusted the cook more than his own brother. But in truth, that trust was as thin as the onion skin sliced at dawn. All it took was a pinch too much of a bitter leaf, a sprinkle of something ground finer than pepper, a single spoon slipped past the tester and straight to the silver platter. By the time the first course reached the candlelit hall above, death already simmered in the broth. One recorded rumor still floats through kitchen tales of an early modern cook in France who used powdered toadstools smuggled in bread rolls to dispatch an unfaithful baron. Historians still argue whether this is just tavern gossip, but in the hush of a midnight scullery, it feels real enough. It wasn't only the wealthy who feared the cook's ladle. Servants who annoyed the kitchen staff found themselves left out of the choicest scraps, an unspoken punishment that could starve a chambermaid or stable boy into sharing secrets instead of stew. The cook's favor was currency, traded for a nod, a wink, a whisper, who visited the master's chambers at odd hours, who might soon disappear, who planned to run away before sunrise. Overhead, nobles danced in candlelight, oblivious to the quiet power simmering below. The cook's kingdom was built on onion peels and broth bones, but the true spice was rumor. To know who ate what and who would never eat again was a secret too tasty to pass up. Quirky details survived here and there, scribbled notes in the margins of old household manuals, a butter-stained page describing which herbs softened the stomach a little too well. Some recipes blurred the line between cure and curse. Sweet almond oil to settle nerves could become bitter almond essence cyanide in a tiny glass vial. Rosemary for memory, or rosemary to mask the taste of foxglove. You wander through the clatter and scrape the smell of yeast and charred bones. Pots bubble over bread rises in the hearth's gentle warmth. Knives glint in shadows. A cook's apprentice, too young to hold a cleaver, steady learns to listen first and chop second. His ears catch the secrets traded when noble guests stumble into the kitchen drunk for a late-night snack. A cook's gossip is a dangerous spice sprinkled lightly. It seasons survival. Spilled too freely, it sours into blackmail. Some scholars remain puzzled by the confessions that bubble up centuries later, deathbed whispers from cooks who claim to have salted a noble stew with more than just brine. They left behind no proof, but stains on a page, a rumor that drifts like smoke from a dying hearth. So you stand here now, barefoot, on the cold flagstones, a wooden spoon in hand. The heat from the ovens wraps around you like a cloak. Somewhere above the household feasts without a thought for who holds the true blade in the shadows of the pantry. If you listen closely, you might hear the clink of coins changing hands for a pinch of something fatal. Or maybe it's just the stew, bubbling over harmless warm and waiting for the next secret to fall in. The echo of hooves on frozen cobblestones drifts through your mind now. Slip your feet into a stable boy's worn boots, mud-caked, straw-scratched, and just quiet enough to carry more than a bucket of oats. In this hidden corner of the manor's grounds, secrets ride between bales of hay and the soft nicker of horses waiting for dawn. Stable hands have long been painted as simple lads, more straw than sense, more horse than man. Yet behind the scent of manure and fresh hay, behind the rhythmic scrape of a curry comb against a glossy flank, these boys ferried messages, smuggled forbidden goods, and sometimes fled with nobles under cover of moonlight. By day, they'd nod obediently, shovel dung, and slap the hindquarters of noble steeds. By night, they slipped letters into saddlebags, tucked contraband in grain sacks, and led trusted horses away when the castle's gates were locked tight. Historians still argue whether smuggling rings truly flourished under the stable roof, or whether these stories gallop too far from the truth. But dig deep enough in old estate ledgers, and you'll find oddities. A missing foal here, a double order of oats there, a line of expenses that doesn't quite add up. Surviving stable logs sometimes reveal cryptic notations. 3 extra shoes, no payment, or midnight rider gone by dawn. You stand now beside a flickering lantern swinging from a hook. The stable smells of damp earth leather tack and the warm breath of drowsy horses. A stable boy, barely 15, works a secret into the straw tiny parcels wrapped in waxed cloth, hidden under hay bales or inside hollowed fence posts. In his pocket, a silver coin rattles payment for silence, or perhaps for betrayal if the price is right. Picture the horses themselves, massive draft beasts and elegant coursers, unknowing accomplices to smuggling schemes. Their saddlebags carried letters coded in invisible ink, tiny barrels of contraband spice, or even human cargo when a desperate noble needed to vanish before dawn's first rooster. Scholars remain puzzled by the ingenuity these boys showed, unlettered, half-starved, yet sharp enough to outwit the guard at the gate with nothing but a bridle and a bluff. In the hush between chores, stable hands whispered among themselves. Who was running from whom? Which lord's debt forced him to send secret gold to a foreign bank? Who was slipping away from an arranged marriage with only a cloak and a promise of safe passage? If walls could talk, they'd trade places with a stable's loose floorboards. So many secrets ground into dirt and hoof prints. Sometimes the smuggling turned bold. Records hint at entire herds shifted under false brands. Royal horses sold off to rivals under the cover of a snowstorm. and always the stable hands vanished before questions found them. One dawn, a lad might be brushing down the king's prize stallion. The next, he'd be a phantom gone with a purse of hush money, leaving behind only boot prints and a half-swept stall. Picture this: a heavy cloak thrown over the back of a dappled mare, a young hand gripping the reins, breath steaming in the moonlight as he guides the noble fugitive through the back paddock gate. Beyond the forest waits black branches and owls' cry, a narrow path known only to those who brush horses by day and slip secrets through shadows by night. Some scraps survive old guard logs that mention suspicious hoofprints, a stable door left unbarred, a trail of straw leading nowhere. Historians still argue if these were mere accidents or deliberate breadcrumbs for those willing to bribe the right boy. But here in the stable's hush, truth feels more believable than fiction. You run your hand over the rough beam of the stable door. A horse snorts, hooves shift, a lantern sputters. Somewhere in the hayloft above a small parcel waits to be claimed before dawn. Maybe it's a letter. Maybe it's a purse of coins. Maybe it's a promise that secrets on horseback travel faster than the law can run. You breathe in the stable's dark warmth, the soft rustle of straw, the hidden creak of smuggled truth. The next time you see a horse grazing in a field, remember those hooves once carried forbidden dreams across borders, their riders half boys, half shadow, all secret. Slip from the stable's hush into the flicker of a single candle behind a heavy wooden door. Here you'll find the letter carriers of scandal, those fleet-footed messengers who risked broken necks and broken oaths to slip secrets through castle gates and city walls. The nobility wrote their plots in delicate script on parchment scented with rosewater, but it was the hand that carried it rough, ink-stained, and invisible that decided whether a kingdom trembled or stayed asleep. You lean against the cold stone of an old corridor, feeling the draft swirl around your ankles. Picture a messenger boy, cloak drawn, tight boots, still damp from riding all night through frost or rain. In his leather satchel, a letter sealed with red wax, an affair, a blackmail, a rebellion that might crack a dynasty if it ever slipped into the wrong hands. Historians still argue whether these runners were trusted kin or just disposable ghosts, paid in coin and silence. Some scholars claim entire webs of underground couriers ferried messages for spies, lovers, and traitors alike. Under the cover of night, these couriers drifted through alleyways and hedge-lined lanes, memorizing shortcuts no map dared show. Their reward? A warm meal, a silver coin, perhaps a swift dagger in the ribs if they spoke out of turn. You trace a finger across an imaginary letter, fine parchment, a smear of candle soot, the faint smell of wax. These scraps, when they survive at all, turn up in hidden drawers or between the pages of household ledgers. Some letters remain sealed to this day, too fragile to open, still daring us to guess whether they betrayed a king or saved a life. Picture a scene, a damp stable yard at dawn, the courier's horse steaming with sweat. A letter tucked inside the messenger's boot, another stitched into the lining of his jerkin, a third hidden in the false bottom of his satchel. Each letter a weight heavier than the saddle's worn leather. A slip of the tongue, a wrong turn down a torch-lit alley, and those secrets scatter like startled crows. A quirky detail hides in a centuries-old rumor. One noble family was said to train its messengers in coded gestures. A tug of the ear meant safe, a hand brushing the shoulder meant danger. True or not, the idea of these young runners weaving through crowds, dropping silent signals, remains deliciously unsettling. The danger didn't always come from the crown. Rivals paid well to intercept a letter before it crossed a border. Some couriers carried false letters to decoys, stuffed with bland pleasantries, while the true scandal rode under the courier's tongue, ready to spill if the coin purse was right. Some say that's how entire rebellions fizzled, betrayed by a single letter carrier, turning his cloak inside out for the highest bidder. You stand now in a flickering hall, feeling the cold bite of the night as you imagine slipping that secret under a locked door. A lady's trembling hand snatches it up, breaks the seal with teeth when no one's looking, eyes darting down the hallway for prying maids or rival spies. She reads by moonlight 3 lines of treason or heartbreak, then tosses the parchment into the fireplace before dawn's bells toll. Only the messenger knows what was written. Only the messenger carries the taste of blackmail back into the shadows. Some scraps of these stories live in footnotes, an intercepted letter that sparked an execution, a bribe scribbled in the margins of an unrelated household account book. Researchers continue to debate if these messengers were mere errand boys or key players in the hidden wars waged behind castle walls. If you listen closely now, you can almost hear the muffled thud of boots on a dirt path, the snap of reins as a tired horse jolts forward. Imagine the final moment, a letter pressed into a sweating palm, a whispered warning, a door creaking open just enough to swallow secrets whole. And somewhere far behind, the echo of another messenger's footfall, carrying the next scandal down a muddy lane toward the edge of history's memory. When you see a yellowed scrap of parchment in a museum, brittle and faded, think of the cold dawn rides that carried it across fields and forests, past ambush and betrayal. Remember the boy's heartbeat, fast, steady, louder than hoofbeats under a starless sky. A letter can die in a fire, but the courier's footsteps linger in the dust. Beyond the hush of hidden letters lies a door, thick oak iron lock, the faint smell of oil and old secrets. Slip your hand into the pocket of a locksmith's apron and feel for the cold, familiar touch of a skeleton key. Here stands the keeper of forbidden thresholds, an ordinary craftsman by day, a silent conspirator by night. Picture a dim workshop just off a cobbled lane. The air tastes of iron filings, singed tallow, and a faint trace of damp wood. In this cramped room, locksmiths hammered, filed, and shaped the tiny bits of metal that could unlock fortunes or ruin them. A single misplaced key could change the course of a family's legacy, unseal a chest of blackmail, or open a hidden passage few dared whisper about. Historians still argue whether these keepers of skeleton keys were forced into betrayal or willingly sold their silence for a handful of silver. Some say locksmiths were the secret brokers of medieval politics, accepting hush money from desperate nobles who needed a new key cut for a door best left locked. Others insist most locksmiths stuck to honest trade, only drawn in when secrets grew too heavy to keep behind a latch. You stand now in the workshop's flickering candlelight, watching the locksmith's hands, scarred, stained with oil, hold a half-finished key up to the light. He tests it against an old iron lock mounted to a wooden plank. Click, click. A perfect fit. Somewhere in a distant castle chamber, that same lock guards love letters, poison vials, or proof of treason. There's a rumor, quirky, half-believed, that some locksmiths left a tiny scratch on the shaft of a skeleton key, their hidden signature. If found by the wrong person, it meant death for both buyer and maker. But no written law could outlaw curiosity, nor stop a desperate noble from bribing a craftsman with enough gold to buy a new workshop in another city altogether. A locksmith's life teetered on a thin blade. One week, he'd fit sturdy locks for a cathedral's treasure chest, praised for his honest skill. The next, he'd be forging a duplicate key by candlelight, knowing full well it might open a rival's bedchamber in the hush of midnight. Surviving account books mention payments for special commissions. No details, just a sum large enough to hush suspicion. Imagine slipping through a dark hallway skeleton key, clutched tight in your palm, your breath held as the cold metal slides into the lock with a whisper. Beyond the door, a noble snores under silk blankets, unaware that his secrets are about to vanish behind an unlocked latch. Some keys found their way back to the locksmith, traded for more gold and more dangerous favors. Some keys vanished into the pockets of servants who learned that an open door meant power. Researchers continue to debate how many betrayals were born from these tiny bits of iron. No castle wall was ever tall enough to guard against the craftsman who shaped its locks. Some stories suggest locksmiths acted as double agents, paid to make a key, and secretly to make another for a rival. One lock, two masters. One door, endless whispers. You might picture a locksmith's tiny forge glowing red at midnight. Sparks drift like fireflies as the metal glows soft enough to shape. A hammer falls soft and careful, no loud clangs to wake nosy neighbors. The smell of scorched oil mingles with the sweetness of beeswax used to ease the key into a stubborn lock. The locksmith works alone, only the occasional creak of the sign swinging outside to mark the hour. A soft footstep outside might mean a new client, a noble in a velvet cloak, eyes darting down the lane to make sure no one sees him slip through the door. Or maybe it's the city guard paid off to look the other way. Inside, the locksmith shrugs, wipes his hands, and nods. Secrets don't ask questions, they just wait to be turned in iron. One day, the locksmith might vanish, leaving behind only a cold forge, half-finished locks, and rumors that drift through taverns like pipe smoke. Some say they fled to start over. Some say they were silenced. All that remains is the echo of keys turning in locks that should never have opened. When you next see an old iron key in a museum case, think of the locksmith's careful hands, the tiny scratch hidden near the bow, the whispered deals that rattled kingdoms more than any sword ever could. Step away from the locksmith's workshop and follow the scent of wet linen and lye soap. Down narrow back stairs through steam-filled sculleries, you find the launderers, those quiet hands who scrubbed silk gowns, stiff collars, and sometimes the bloodstains no noble dared admit to wearing. In a kingdom where appearance was everything, the laundress held more than just dirty laundry. She held proof that sins could be rinsed away, but never forgotten. You stand now at the edge of a stone washhouse, warmth rising in ghostly plumes as boiling water sloshes in heavy iron cauldrons. Wooden paddles clack against washboards, cloth slaps, wet stone, and the air fills with the sharp tang of soapwort and ash. The launderer's hands raw and puckered twist expensive fabrics, velvet linen embroidered silks that drape the same nobles who commissioned secrets and silenced witnesses. Historians still argue about the hints and half-confessions tucked inside household records. Did laundresses truly gossip to spies, slipping word of suspicious stains, or torn sleeves to the local constable? Or were they simply overworked ghosts, too busy scrubbing to care about the whispers swirling around the garments in their baskets? Some say both. Survival depended on knowing which blood to wash clean and which to leave as a warning. Imagine the laundress who discovers a sleeve crusted in dark rust brown. A tiny tear at the cuff suggests a dagger fight. She dunks the fabric, turns it over under hot water, watching the red swirl down the drain. Some stains vanish, some spread, and sometimes the launderer remembers tucks the memory away to trade if the constable's coin ever runs dry. One quirky rumor survives in a letter scrawled by a visiting noblewoman. She claimed her laundress stitched a lock of hair into the hem of a freshly pressed gown insurance should her ladyship ever cross her. Scholars remain puzzled by this odd practice, but the idea drifts through laundries, like steam on cold mornings. Secrets hidden not just in stains, but in seams and stitches no one but the launderer ever noticed. In the hush of midnight, a launderer might hang freshly scrubbed sheets in the castle's back courtyard, eyes flicking upward to the dark windows where nobles slept, easy believing no trace of violence clung to their clothes. The linen billowed like ghost flags, each flap in the wind a whispered reminder that no robe is ever truly clean. Records from a Tudor manor list unusually frequent washing of the king's hunting doublets, perhaps innocent, perhaps not. 1 century later, a laundress confessed on her deathbed that she burned soiled shirts rather than risk letting the court see just how often royal cuffs were stained with blood. Researchers continued to debate whether this was dramatic invention or a glimpse of how the humble washhouse sometimes protected thrones better than an army could. Picture the stone floor, slick with suds. A young apprentice drags a basket twice her size from the riverbank, where cold water numbs her hands as she rinses out dark blotches the soap can't quite erase. The mistress laundress inspects each garment by firelight, her cracked fingers running over hidden seams, checking for more than frayed threads. A dropped pin, a scrap of torn lace, a smear no lime boil, can bleach away tiny hints of stories, far too costly for parchment. It wasn't always blood. Love letters fell from pockets during washing, secret tokens, tucked in cuffs, pressed flowers, a lady's ribbon tied around a noble's wrist. Some of these trinkets found their way into gossip. Some never left the laundry basket at all, buried under layers of wet sheets until they rotted to pulp. Some scholars remain puzzled by how many family scandals started as a stain at the bottom of a wash tub. If you listen now, you can almost hear the gentle splash of water, the slap of wet linen against stone. A sigh from a laundress who knows she holds a noble's life in her soap-chapped palms. Will she speak? Will she keep scrubbing? Or will she slip out the back gate to trade her silence for coin at the nearest tavern? When you next press a clean sheet to your cheek, remember the centuries when washing linen meant washing away evidence one lather at a time. One hidden secret, swirling down a dark drain that never forgets. Slip through the steam of the washhouse and into the hush of a nursery where the scent of warm milk and beeswax drifts through candlelit halls. Here rest the nannies and wet nurses keepers of hush-hush airs and cradle secrets that shaped entire bloodlines, while nobles squabbled in banquet halls and whispered vows behind locked doors. It was the nurse's lullaby that guarded truths too scandalous for parchment. Picture a drafty chamber at dawn. A cradle rocks gently, while a pale candle flickers against damp stone walls. A wet nurse hair tucked under a linen cap hums low enough not to wake the household. In her arms lies a baby with eyes too sharp for his swaddling. Some say that baby might carry the wrong father's nose, the wrong mother's blush. But the world beyond these four walls must never know. Historians still argue whether wet nurses wielded quiet power or were just silent shadows at the edge of noble rooms. Some records hint at huge hush payments, fine clothes, extra grain rations, a small cottage on the manor's edge, bribes for a promise that no accidental truth would slip into the wrong ear. In these hushed hours, the nurse becomes more than a caretaker. She's a living lockbox. She knows who comes and goes by moonlight, who slips gold into her apron for silence, who trusts her to soothe a noble babe that may never sit on a throne yet threatens it all the same. A scholar's note from the 17th century even records a scandal where a wet nurse vanished in the night, taking with her not just the baby's feeding schedule, but a bloodline secret so dangerous it was never written down. You lean against the nursery door and imagine the squeak of the rocking cradle, the soft, damp breathing of an air nestled in fresh linen. A damp cloth dabs milk from a rosy chin. A lullaby floats through the hush, a promise that secrets cradle secrets one generation to the next. Some wet nurses tucked messages in baby blankets, half lullaby, half warning if the father grew cruel or a rival threatened harm. A quirky rumor whispers that a certain noble house owed its entire fortune to a single nurse who swapped babes in the cradle, hiding a secret heir when the official one coughed his last in a cold winter. Scholars remain puzzled by half-burned letters hinting at such swaps. Did they truly happen? Or were they bedtime myths, spun by tired maids to keep each other company on endless night shifts? In the nursery's soft shadows, trust hangs like a mobile above the crib, delicate spinning, easy to break. A nurse's word could unmake marriages, topple alliances, spark wars of inheritance that dragged entire regions into ruin. And yet, with every coo and gentle shush, the world beyond the nursery door stayed asleep. Imagine the moments no history book records a noble father pacing at the threshold, trying not to flinch at the baby's mismatched features. A mother pressing a finger to her lips, nodding at the nurse to hush the cry before it drifts down the hall. The nurse who knows the real story, stitched between bloodlines, sings a song she learned from her own mother, words that never make it to paper, but linger like a ghost in family legends. Some scraps survive baptism records with sudden name changes. Suspicious godparents hastily swapped fortunes, re-signed when a new babe emerged from a hidden cradle. Researchers continue to debate how many kingdoms balanced on the hush of a lullaby, how many noble lines owe their polished family trees to the gentle hum of a woman no portrait ever painted. You drift now through the hush of straw mattresses and flickering lanterns, the sweet sour scent of milk and sleep. Somewhere beyond the door, a castle feasts, unaware that its future naps in a cradle guarded by lullabies and secrets wrapped in linen. A wet nurse rocks back and forth, humming just loud enough to drown out doubt, just soft enough to keep truth breathing. When you see an old cradle in a museum, it's wood worn smooth by restless nights and whispered songs. Remember the hush. Remember the secrets that slept inside, safe in the arms of a woman who knew when to hold her tongue and when to cradle a lie. Slip from the nursery's cradle into the hush of polished hallways and flickering candle sconces. Here walks the butler, master of keys of wine cellars and of secrets locked tighter than any coffer. If the spy maid overheard whispers, the butler wrote them down. If the chamber boy saw a lover slip through a side door, the butler already had the name tucked away in his black book, inked in the neatest hand. Imagine the soft thud of polished shoes on flagstones at midnight. The butler drifts through the great house like a polite ghost, his keys clinking faintly, a quiet reminder that every locked door swings for him. He knows who arrived unannounced, who left unpaid bills tucked under plates of untouched roast, who slipped a purse of coins into a footman's palm for an unasked favor. Historians still argue over the existence of these so-called black books, ledgers not of accounts owed to the house, but debts owed by its master. Rumors linger in footnotes, entries that recorded not just how many bottles of wine were drunk, but who drank them and with whom. A soft insurance policy, a hush fund written in iron gall ink. You stand now by the butler's pantry, a small, orderly room, humming with quiet menace. Rows of polished silver gleam under candlelight, their reflections warped and watchful. Somewhere on a top shelf sits a slim, leather-bound book, its pages filled with neat lines that have nothing to do with cutlery and everything to do with power. One quirky tale still floats through the corridors of country manors, a butler who threatened to reveal a noble's secret affair unless his own son was granted a minor title. No written proof, survived just a scribbled note on the back of a wine order, hinting at a trade far more intoxicating than any cask in the cellar. Scholars remain puzzled by how many fortunes rose or fell with a single discreet nod from the man who poured the port. By day, the butler was a paragon of discretion. White gloves, silver trays, a polite bow that concealed a mind sharper than any courtier's blade. By night, he listened at half-open doors, took careful note of a suspicious guest's lingering glance, a slurred confession whispered over brandy by a too-drunk duke. A single phrase, half overheard, could be worth more than a year's wage if traded at the right time. Picture him standing at the foot of a grand staircase, candles guttering in their sconces as the last guests stumble out. He smooths his waistcoat checks, that every silver spoon is accounted for, and that every whispered indiscretion is tucked safe in his mind. Some secrets stay buried forever. Some emerge decades later, when a butler's nephew finds an old notebook hidden behind loose boards. Surviving household records sometimes mention suspicious severance, huge sums paid to a departing butler for loyal service. A polite phrase for buying silence, sealing lips that knew too much about who bedded whom, who plotted treason after dessert, who owed debts that could drown a family name in scandal. In the hush of his private pantry, the butler might chuckle at the irony his polished shoes were welcome in every room, except the one where his real treasures were kept hidden between pages locked in a box no noble dared force open. Some scholars remain divided over whether these black books were real or just ghost stories whispered to keep employers honest. You stand now in that hush candle flame, flickering across polished pewter and glass decanters half full of secrets. The butler's pen scratches softly over a page, one name, one date, one leverage point that might never see daylight, or might topple a noble line if the price was right. Imagine him slipping through the darkened halls one last time, keys at his hip, black book hidden under his coat. He nods to a footman, ignores the dozing guards by the front door, and vanishes into the night. By dawn, he's a ghost, rumors swirling in his wake, like cellar dust disturbed by a passing foot. When you see an old service bell or silver salver at a country estate, think of the man who polished it by day and polished secrets by night. Think of how many reputations slept uneasily, while a butler scribbled notes by candlelight, each page a soft rattle of power in the hush behind the dining room door, slip from polished corridors into the echoing hush of stone cloisters and candlelit scriptoria. Now, your footsteps echo beside monks, silent witnesses cloaked in rough wool quills, scratching secrets into parchment, long after the nobles who whispered them had turned to dust. If butlers hoarded gossip for coin, these monks hoarded confessions for eternity, binding whispers in leather and hiding them behind the holy hush of monastery walls. Picture a narrow hallway chilled by centuries of damp stone. A monk bends over a simple desk by a flickering oil lamp, the air scented with ink and beeswax. His quill dances across calfskin parchment, copying prayers, sermons, and sometimes coded records of nobles' darkest deeds slipped to him in confession or rumor. Historians still argue whether scribes embroidered these secrets into margins intentionally or simply couldn't help but record the sins they overheard through thin chapel walls. In some abbeys, the monks doubled as scribes for the local lords, writing contracts, settling disputes, translating foreign letters. But the quiet power lay in the bits they did not officially write down, hidden lines inked between psalms or woven into the genealogy of a saint. You stand beside the scriptorium door, now peering in at rows of robed men heads, bowed quills whispering on vellum. A whisper softer than a sin, but sharper than a blade. One quirky scrap of rumor clings to the archives of a forgotten priory, a monk who copied a noble's scandalous affair into the margin of a book of hours, disguised as a footnote about seasonal fasting. Centuries later, a sleepy archivist turned the page and found an entire ruined lineage hidden under the blessing of a saint. Scholars remain puzzled whether this was an act of sly revenge, divine duty, or simply a bored monk with too many secrets to keep to himself. Imagine the hush of a confessional, the hiss of winter wind through cracked stained glass. A noble kneels, breath steaming in the cold, whispering sins too heavy for parchment. The monk nods, murmurs penance, then returns to his desk and slips just enough truth into a binding edge, a secret left for some future pair of eyes to find when the old walls crumble. Researchers continue to debate just how much political damage these quiet chroniclers did without ever lifting a sword. Some abbeys grew suspiciously wealthy overnight. Some monks vanished when a secret inked in the wrong place drifted into the wrong hands. No battalion ever guarded a king's bedroom like the soft shuffle of sandals on monastery floors. You wander now down the echoing nave, where candlelight flickers off stone saints, watching with sightless eyes. A lone monk sweeps fallen parchment scraps into a basket. His robes smell of old vellum and pressed herbs. He knows more about who fathered which hidden heir than any court gossip ever dared guess aloud. The monastery garden waits beyond the cloister, sweet lavender rows of simple vegetables, a hush broken only by the flap of crows. Here, confessions floated into the air like mist. A whispered bargain traded over spade handles, an overheard bribe discussed while gathering mint for the abbey kitchen. Even the garden beds kept secrets, their soil fattened by the scraps of parchment monks burned to protect some noble's fragile pride. One soft truth winds through all these stone walls the scribes wrote because they could not speak. A vow of silence for some, a vow of discretion for all. But parchment remembers what voices swallow. When you see an illuminated manuscript behind museum glass, tiny gold leaf, halos, delicate saints, look closer. Between the prayers and genealogy charts, maybe there's a name out of place, a scandal hidden in the flourish of a capital letter, a scribbled margin that once ruined a marriage, crowned a bastard, toppled a minor barony without ever swinging a sword. You slip your hand along the cold stone as you leave the scriptorium's hush behind. Somewhere under these flagstones, whole volumes lie buried, forgotten, perhaps on purpose. Above, the monks still shuffle through dawn's first bell's sandals, brushing stone secrets bound in leather, just waiting for the curious to turn a page. When you open an old book and breathe in that musty drift of age and ink, remember this: the past's darkest shadows sometimes live not in royal archives or sealed chests, but in the careful, patient script of a monk who knew no crown was so heavy it couldn't be cracked by the scratch of a quiet quill. Step through the echoing cloisters and let your feet find the garden path, soft earth underfoot, the hush of dawn mist rising from freshly turned beds. Here, among neat rows of herbs and rose bushes, heavy with dew, you meet the gardeners, caretakers of more than tulips and thyme. In hidden corners of these quiet plots, noble secrets were buried deeper than roots, tended by hands that knew when to dig and when to cover the past with blossoms. Imagine the faint scrape of a trowel at dusk. A gardener kneels by a hedge that shields him from prying eyes on the manor's upper floors. To the master of the house, he is invisible, a bent-back muddy boots, a polite nod at best. But the gardener knows whose footprints mark the orchard at night, whose mistress slips through the hedge maze with a lover's note. Sometimes those notes never reach their intended heart. Sometimes they sleep forever under a rose bush that blooms just a little too red come spring. Historians still argue whether gardens truly hid the evidence of betrayal, or if these tales are just the weeds of rumor growing wild in old estate records. Yet scraps survive receipts for sudden shipments of quicklime odd accounts of whole garden beds dug up and replanted overnight, the occasional note about a sudden transfer of a head gardener for reasons undisclosed. You stand now among neat rows of boxwood hedges and soft banks of lavender. The scent wraps around you earthy sweet and just sharp enough to mask the rot of truth beneath. In one corner, a simple stone marks a forgotten pet's grave. Or so the ledger says. But some whisper that beneath the soil lies more than a dog, perhaps a lover's letter, a ledger page blackmailing a duke, a dagger still sticky with betrayal that never made it to the constable's hands. A quirky rumor lingers in the footnotes of a minor noble's diary. He claimed his gardener once buried an entire chest of scandalous letters rather than burn them. When the lord died suddenly, the gardener vanished with a map to that hidden trove, leaving behind only a rose bush that outlived the manor itself by a century. Scholars remain puzzled. Was it true? Or just a baron's bedside, fancy scribbled after too much brandy? Picture the hush of dawn as the gardener pulls on worn gloves, brushes frost from the cabbages, listens for the clink of coins paid to keep secrets under mulch and marigolds. Some bribes came as a new set of shears, a warm cottage by the orchard, an old coat passed down from the master himself. Small gifts for large silences. Researchers continue to debate whether these quiet caretakers acted out of loyalty or self-preservation. Some argue they held more power than the manor's scribe because parchment burns, but dirt remembers. A gardener knows which root to plant to hide a patch of disturbed soil, which thorny hedge keeps prying eyes from finding a hidden door. They map these plots in their heads, never on paper, because no noble wants to sign a confession for where their skeletons sleep. Sometimes it wasn't death or blackmail buried among the bulbs. A mother's letter disowning a child for a forbidden love. A forged birth record hidden in a mason jar beneath the apple tree. A scrap of poisoned bread meant for rats, but remembered too late when a rival lord fell sick after a garden feast. You pause beside a tangled bramble of wild roses. Thorn pricks your finger just enough to remind you how easily beauty hides the sharp edge of truth. The gardener hums somewhere beyond the hedge, clipping dead heads off blooms that never stop watching. His boots leave shallow prints that the morning sun quickly erases, but beneath your feet, the secrets remain roots, twisted with rumor bones of scandal, feeding next season's blossoms. In the hush of these beds, the garden is both keeper and confessor, a place where soil and silence trade secrets that no court scribe could ever ink. When you next smell fresh-cut grass or brush a rose petal to your nose, remember that centuries ago, a gardener's spade turned more than earth. It turned gossip to mulch, scandal to compost, and kept a kingdom blooming on the lie that nothing dangerous ever grows in the dark. Slip through the garden gate and down a narrow stone-walled corridor that curves like a whisper through the bones of an old manor. Here in the hush between walls, you find the secret passage guides those shadowy souls who knew every twist behind a hearth, every stair hidden in the thickness of ancient brick. To the noble, these passages were lifelines routes to escape a jealous rival, a wronged spouse, or a dagger drawn at the wrong dinner table. To the guides, they were maps to secrets traded for coin favor or freedom. Imagine the flick of a candle guttering low, the scrape of a loose stone shifting to reveal a crawl space just wide enough for two bodies pressed breathless against old mortar. Secret passages weren't built for comfort, just survival. A noble might boast about 100 soldiers at the gate, but trust his skin only to a servant who knew which panel swung aside with a gentle push. Historians still argue about how widespread these hidden routes truly were. Some castles still cough up their secrets. Staircases tucked inside walls, low tunnels leading under courtyards, trapdoors hidden in the shadows of grand fireplaces. A guide, often a trusted footman, scullery maid, or stable boy, turned discreet smuggler, could slip a lord from his chambers to a waiting horse in the orchard before the conspirators even raised a toast to his downfall. Step softly now. The stones are cold under your fingertips, damp with the hush of centuries. You follow the imagined footsteps of a girl no older than 15, lantern-hooded, leading a panicked duchess down a spiral stair that no architect's blueprint ever claimed. Her breath clouds the dark. The duchess clutches a velvet cloak around trembling shoulders, whispering promises of gold that might never come. The guide's eyes stay down. She knows the passage better than any titled lady does her own drawing room. A quirky rumor weaves through old household journals, a guide who never accepted payment in coin, only in secrets. For each noble who used his hidden passage, he asked a question: "Who do you fear most tonight?" and kept their answers like gold. Some say he built his own private map of power, an invisible ledger of whispered names, ready to sell if the tide turned against him. Scholars remain puzzled by scraps of these rumors, half-told tales tucked in footnotes, a servant's name that pops up in too many confessions. Picture the hush of the passage dust drifting from ancient beams, the faint tick of distant boots on marble above. Somewhere behind you, the grand ballroom hums with laughter and clinking goblets. Here the only sound is your own heartbeat, a lantern's low hiss, and the soft drag of your palm over chillstone. Researchers continue to debate whether these guides were heroes or parasites. Some say they saved lives, spiriting noble children away from sieges, ferrying rebel priests through hidden doors when the crowned soldiers thundered at the front gate. Others claim they were opportunists, selling knowledge of bolt holes to assassins, betraying the same passage twice in a single night, if the gold weighed heavy enough. Even the architecture tells the story. Some manor houses still reveal odd half-width doorways, staircases that end abruptly, crawl spaces too narrow for furniture, but perfect for a fleeing lord, and a guide quick enough to snuff a lantern at the sound of a guard's breath. One late account describes a secret door disguised as a wine rack. Pull the right bottle, and the whole shelf swung inward on oiled iron hinges. beyond a cold tunnel, earth-floored, braced with old oak beams, leading to an orchard or a gatehouse far from prying eyes. Many of these hidden veins collapsed long ago, timber-rotted stone walls, caved-in secrets, swallowed by the earth that once protected them. You drift now through that imagined passage, hands brushing cobwebs, knees knocking loose stones. You see the guide ahead, just a flicker of a lantern, a soft hush as she turns back, finger pressed to her lips. Behind the walls, the noble world chatters on about honor and loyalty. Inside the stone, real survival winds down dark stairs nobody admits exist. When you stand in an old castle, staring at an oddly shallow fireplace, or a door that seems too thin to hold back, the wind, remember the guides. Remember that no noble ever truly escaped alone. Someone always waited with a lamp, and the key to vanish if the price, the fear, or the secret was just desperate enough to trade passage for silence. Step out from the hush of hidden tunnels and slip into the soft rustle of silk velvet and clever disguise. Here, among the noble's secret keepers, stand the wardrobe masters, silent tailors, who stitched not only hems and cuffs, but entire new identities. When a duke needed to slip past a watchful rival, when a countess fled a scandal under moonlight, it was the wardrobe master who dressed them in shadows. Picture a candlelit sewing room, tucked behind the great hall, the air scented with wax-fresh cloth and the faint tang of iron needles. Bolts of fine wool and silk spill from open trunks. A tape measure hangs like a noose around a quiet figure's neck. In this hush, a wardrobe master pins a false beard into place, slides a wide-brimmed hat over a noble's anxious curls, and sews secrets into seams that no guard will think to check. Historians still argue whether these tailors and dressers truly wielded power or simply played along. Some believe they were nothing more than loyal artisans, paid hands who asked no questions. Others insist they held the threads of entire plots, because when you can dress a countess as a milkmaid or a baron as a lowly monk, you can smuggle secrets through the front gate bold as daylight. You stand now in that narrow room, listening to the soft snip of scissors, the hush of a needle drawing silk thread through black velvet. A noble stands half undressed behind a folding screen, their voice low and urgent. It must be perfect. No one must know me. The wardrobe master nods, face unreadable pins clamped between their lips. Each stitch is an unspoken oath or a quiet threat. One quirky rumor drifts through the letters of an old Venetian tailor. He claimed he once dressed a runaway prince as a traveling actor, complete with painted mask and tunic dyed with cheap indigo, so no one would suspect royal silk beneath. Some say the prince escaped to another kingdom, lived out his days in shabby inns, his secret stitched into the lining of a threadbare cloak. Scholars remain puzzled by scraps of this tale. Was it true, or just a tailor's boast over too much wine and too few coins? Picture the hush of that moment, the final fitting under flickering lamplight, the rustle of fine fabric swapped for rough linen, a ring too recognizable hidden in a coat lining, a dagger once jeweled wrapped in cheap wool to pass unnoticed by a guard's quick glance. The wardrobe master packs away the truth, folds it into the shadows, and sends the noble out the door as someone entirely new. Researchers continue to debate how many revolutions, affairs, and quiet disappearances slipped through the world on disguised feet. Some wardrobe masters vanished themselves, hanged for treason. Some whispered or spirited away by patrons too grateful to leave them behind where the wrong tongue might loosen. Many more left nothing but ledgers full of fabric expenses and adjustments ordinary words for extraordinary acts of deceit. Imagine the silence of the grand hall as a disguised guest drifts past guards who doff their caps none the wiser that the soft voice under a common cloak once thundered orders at court. Picture the wardrobe master at their sewing table, head bent, already stitching another costume for another scandal that must vanish under starched collars and false sleeves. Sometimes the clothes themselves held secrets, coded messages stitched into hems with colored thread, a hidden pocket just large enough for a folded letter. A well-cut doublet could hide a lockpick, a forged pass, a vial of poison tucked under a velvet lapel. In these seams and linings, the wardrobe master became a conspirator, a smuggler, and a witness all in one. You stand there now, fingers brushing the smooth edge of a velvet cloak draped across a mannequin's shoulders. Somewhere behind a locked door, a noble sheds their old life like an evening coat. In the hush of silk and candle flame, they become whoever they must be, while the wardrobe master tucks away another payment, another secret, another reason to keep the scissors sharp and the tongue even sharper. So when you see an antique cloak in a museum, case velvet faded embroidery dulled by time, remember that centuries ago it might have walked through palace gates twice in a single night, worn by two different souls under the same moon. Its true story, hidden in stitches no guard would ever think to unpick. Step out of the wardrobe master's flickering sewing room and slip into the hush of a grand banquet hall. Heavy oak beams overhead chandeliers, dripping candle wax like frozen rain. Here move the wine stewards and cupbearers, those soft-footed guardians of goblets and secrets. Where nobles raised glasses to toast alliances, it was the steward's careful hand that decided whether that final sip sealed a bond or tipped a kingdom into sudden ruin. Picture the hush between courses, servants gliding along polished floors, silver trays, gleaming the scent of roasted meats, and spiced pies swirling under tapestries woven to muffle treasonous talk. The wine steward stands at the head of this quiet current, a discreet shadow, refilling goblets, tasting each pour with lips that never tremble, even when the next sip might carry a hint of bitter almond or crushed foxglove. Historians still argue over how many stewards truly poisoned their masters or simply stood watch for another's hidden hand. Some say they were loyal protectors, risking their tongues and throats to taste each vintage first. Others insist they traded silence for coin-swapping casks behind locked cellar doors, slipping fatal sweetness into a cup when the purse was heavy enough. You stand now at the edge of a cold stone cellar, breathing in the damp oak of stacked barrels, beeswax candles guttering on rough wooden racks. The steward keys jangling softly at his belt selects a bottle dusty, sealed with thick wax, its label marked with a sign only he and his master understand. A careful nod, a swirl in a polished silver goblet, and a single sip to prove his loyalty. Or his treachery. A quirky rumor clings to the dim pages of a forgotten court ledger. One cupbearer supposedly swapped wine between goblets at a king's feast, turning a toast meant to kill his master into the death of an unsuspecting cousin instead. Some scholars remain puzzled by how often these small slips appear in scattered chronicles, too clumsy for pure accident, too convenient to be mere chance. In the hush of the feast, gossip floats above the clink of glasses. The steward leans in murmuring tasting notes while listening for careless words, an indiscreet flirtation, a whispered plot. He files each crumb away behind polite bows and careful pours. Later, that same crumb might find its way to a rival's ear, exchanged for gold, heavier than any cask in the cellars below. Researchers continue to debate whether these wine stewards were true conspirators or just unwilling witnesses to the poisonings and poisoned tongues of their masters. Some old letters tell of cupbearers slipping coded warnings to loyal guests, an extra flick of the cloth napkin, a refilled goblet poured just slow enough to say, "Don't drink this one." Some failed, falling face down beside the very nobles they tried to save. You stand now in the glow of that imagined hall, flickering candles, crystal goblets lifted in fragile hands, the soft swirl of ruby liquid that tastes like power and betrayal all at once. The steward's eyes flick between faces. Who has drunk too deep? Who pushes aside an untouched glass? Who might never taste another drop? Sometimes the poison was not poison at all. A sour wine that embarrassed a guest, a diluted vintage that hinted at a house's failing fortune. A cupbearer's tiny silent rebellion, a subtle ruin of a toast that might shift alliances without a drop of blood spilled. One steward's black book, long lost, was rumored to list every noble's weakness by drink, who grew loose-tongued on claret, who staggered on spiced mead, who could be coaxed into confessions after just a single cup of honeyed brandy. Imagine the hush of that ledger, hidden in a drawer behind the oldest casks, inked with secrets that never made it into court chronicles, but shaped them all the same. So when you stand in front of an antique wine goblet, behind museum glass, silver-stemmed dulled bowl, engraved with faded crests, remember the steward's quiet lips on its rim, the soft swirl of danger in every pour. A single drop could turn a banquet hall into a battlefield, a toast into a last breath, a loyal servant into a ghost drifting down cellar stairs, keys at his hip, and secrets still sloshing in the bottom of an unfinished cup. Step softly now, away from the glow of candlelit feasts, and deep into the hush of the churchyard at midnight, where the shovels bite deeper than any gossip, and the grave diggers know which truths deserve no tombstone. Among all the secret keepers in noble houses, the grave diggers of forbidden truths, buried more than bones beneath the cold, soft earth. Picture the hush of a moonlit graveyard, crooked stones, the scent of damp moss, and the faint rustle of owl wings overhead. A lone figure stands knee-deep in a half-dug pit breath, misting in the dark. His shovel's scrape echoes off the chapel wall, soft, steady, and final. Historians still argue how many secrets ended here, wrapped not in shrouds, but in whispers that no priest ever dared record. Some grave diggers worked under the cloak of the church, tending holy ground with calloused hands and eyes that turned away when noble footsteps crossed their plots at odd hours. Others were hired by lords and ladies who needed something or someone gone so completely that parchment could not bear the weight of their story. Imagine him pausing now, lantern perched on a nearby headstone, the flame flickering over a small wooden box. Inside might lie a blood-stained dagger that never made it to trial a letter too damning for the family vault, or a tiny bundle that once cried for a mother whose name could never be spoken in court. A soft thud of earth covers it all, one more secret fed to the worms. One quirky rumor sticks in the pages of old parish notes, a grave digger in a tiny coastal village who supposedly buried 2 coffins for one body, one empty, to appease the gossips, one hidden deep in a graveyard's forgotten corner, to keep a noble's shame from haunting his heirs. Some scholars remain puzzled by small stone markers, misaligned plots, and parish registers that do not quite add up. You stand now, in the hush of that cold plot, feeling the damp soil under your boots. The grave digger leans on his shovel, eyeing the manor's dark windows up the hill. He knows whose ring glints on a finger that should have rotted long ago. He knows why a grave is dug twice in the same week. He knows what the priest pretends not to see when he sprinkles holy water over earth that hides more than honest sin. Researchers continue to debate how much these night soil men were paid and who paid them. Was it gold pressed into a palm behind the chapel, a warm cottage on the edge of the graveyard, a promise that no blade would find their throat so long as their shovel found only silence? For all the neat rows of marble angels and chiseled epitaphs, there are more unmarked mounds where secrets sleep than any noble family tree dares confess. Some grave diggers whispered to each other across crooked fences, trading tales of missing heirs, buried before they could ruin a marriage of duelists, slipped into paupers' plots, so the family name might stay unsullied by a scandal. Sometimes they dug up secrets too. Bodies pulled from shallow graves under moonlight, when a rumor drifted back that the corpse held a ring, or a letter worth more than a noble's last name. Picture him now finishing the grave as dawn spills cold light across the stone wall. He wipes his hands on rough wool knocks, back a swig from a flask hidden in his coat. The mound is smooth, the marker blank, the truth lost to the hush of soil and moss. He turns to the church crosses himself for sins he never wrote, but buried deep enough that the next century must dig twice to find them. When you pass an old graveyard with its crooked stones and moss-cloaked corners, think of the secrets that lie just beneath your feet. Noble betrayals folded under churchyard sod, rumors softened by generations of roots. The wind sighs through iron gates. The earth shifts with every thaw and freeze. But what was buried by night remains loyal to the shovel that tucked it in. So next time you see a simple, nameless stone or an old churchyard wall crumbling into weeds, remember, kingdoms were once guarded not just by castle walls and armored men, but by the steady swing of a gravedigger's spade, burying truth so deep that only the restless earth ever dares remember. Slip from the cold hush of the graveyard and drift to a quiet chamber where the air tastes of old wool blankets and flickering tallow candles. Here lies the eldest servant body, failing breath, slowing tongue, loosening for the first time in decades. If gravediggers buried truths in earth, the oldest maid footman or butler cracked them open again on a deathbed, whispering secrets heavy enough to outlast the rattling of their final sigh. Picture a tiny bed tucked in a drafty attic room above the manor's grand hall. The walls are thin enough that a late servant's moan can slip through the cracks to the scullery below, carrying fragments of names, sins, debts, betrayals. The family waits in the candlelit corridor, half hoping for forgiveness, half dreading what the final words might unleash. Historians still argue whether these confessions were desperate half-truths, brandy-fueled fancies, or the last gasp of revenge for a lifetime spent bowing and scraping. You stand at the foot of the narrow bed now. The elder servant's hands, once strong enough to haul trunks or carry silver trays for hours, lie folded over a thin blanket. The air hums with the hush of final breaths, and a secret so sharp it cuts the stale attic air wide open. One quirky rumor drifts through parish records, an ancient nursemaid who with her final breath revealed that the earl's legitimate son was a stable boy's child swapped at birth to save the lady's honor. No ledger ever proved it, but family portraits show a boy with dark hair and eyes no father ever had. Scholars remain puzzled by how many noble lines were drawn, erased, and redrawn by these whispered truths. Some final confessions were softer, where the hidden money was buried under the orchard's oldest tree, which cellar wall held a box of letters no heir should ever read, why a wedding was hurried one spring after a too long winter. Researchers continued to debate how many family fortunes were saved or ruined by a single sentence rasped out beside a guttering candle. Imagine the hush of this moment. A master leans close ear, nearly touching dry lips. A final name slips free, curling into the attic rafters, where spiders spin webs above a bed too small for so large a truth. The servant's eyes flutter closed, unburdened, or maybe newly burdened, having handed off a secret too heavy for the grave alone. Some confessions came with conditions. Burn my letters. Tell her I forgave her. Promise you'll never open the locked trunk beneath the cellar stairs. Many families kept their word more burned, the trunk unopened, afraid to know what was inside. But every so often, a curious air cracked the lock after the funeral, finding faded papers that rewrote a family crest, or turned a whispered rumor into a scandal that fed generations of hungry gossips. You linger at the bedside, tracing your finger along the cracked windowsill where frost creeps in. The candle flickers, a final breath, rattles, and the hush thickens. Downstairs, the household moves about its duties. Fires stoked, porridge stirred unaware that the very foundation of the manor has shifted with a whisper that no lock could ever hold back. A final quirk. Some old deathbed confessions were written, not spoken, scrawled in a trembling hand on scraps of linen, or the back of an old ledger page. Tucked under pillows, slipped into a pocket to be found when the body was washed. Scholars still stumble on these scraps in dusty trunks and sealed family Bibles, half-finished truths that spark more questions than they answer. So when you wander an old manor and see a faded attic window or a narrow servant's stair curling behind the grand staircase, pause and listen. Somewhere between the timber beams and the old floorboards drifts a last confession, one that outlived the loyal feet that swept the halls and the cracked hands that poured wine for secrets to blossom. When you lay your own head down tonight, spare a thought for the secrets that outlive even the tongues that once kept them hidden. The hush of a final breath, the soft scratch of a quill in shaking fingers, the last sigh that cracks a truth, wide open, just in time for the world to forget how to bury it again. And now, hush, let it all slip away. The candle gutters low in that attic room. The echoes of whispered confessions fade behind heavy doors, and every secret keeper, maid's monk's garden hands, returns to dust, taking their stolen truths with them beneath blankets of quiet earth. Let your breath soften as you picture those old corridors, falling, still silk drapes, unmoving keys, rusting on forgotten belts, passage walls, hiding only drafts instead of trembling footsteps. Even the garden's tangled roses close for the night roots, curling deeper around secrets that will never wake. Somewhere in the hush of history, a chamber boy sets down his broom for the last time. A cook wipes clean a pot that once stirred poison and parsley side by side. A stable hand pats the nose of a drowsy horse that will carry no more contraband across moonlit fields. All drift into the same silence where even the loudest scandal softens to a sigh in the pages of the past. Breathe in that old dust and let it drift far from your mind, replaced by the soft hum of your own quiet heart. Feel the hush that cloaked those corridors settle on your shoulders like a warm blanket. Imagine the click of a latch closing for good. No more gossip to overhear. No more secrets to bribe or bury. just rest. If you'd like to slip back into halls like these again, there will always be more stories. Sleepy, dusty, hidden away in forgotten corners of old stone walls. And maybe if you're still half awake tomorrow, you'll wonder which secret you'd have kept safe and who you'd have trusted to carry it to the grave. But tonight, there's nothing left to keep. Let it all go. Let your eyelids grow heavy, and let the past bury itself in dreams softer than any hush that ever crept through a castle corridor.